Good morning and welcome to the Landmarks Preservation Commission's public hearing and public meeting of October 31st, 2023. We'll begin by taking attendance, and I'll ask our General Counsel, Mark Silverman, to call the roll.
Chair Carroll.
Aye. Here, sorry.
Vice Chair Bland.
I am here.
Commissioner Chapin. Is she going to be remote? Do we know?
Here. Here.
There.
Thank you. Commissioner Chen. Commissioner Chu.
Here.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
Here.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Here.
Commissioner Jefferson. Here. Commissioner Lutfi.
Here.
Commissioner Master.
Here.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Here. Good morning and again, and welcome to our public hearing and public meeting of today, Tuesday, October 31st. This meeting is being held in person in our public hearing room at 1 Center Street on the 9th floor. We're also holding, airing this public meeting on Zoom so that remote participants can watch the proceedings and testify on any public hearing items. And finally, today's proceedings will also be on our YouTube channel live streamed. So if you'd just like to watch the proceedings, you can do so there. And we have a very full agenda today, and I'm going to turn it over to Corey Harala, our Director of Preservation, to take us through our agenda.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. We'll start today's Preservation Department agenda with public meeting items. The first is public meeting item number 1, LPC 22-09135. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 1217, Lot 1, 165 to 167 West 86th Street, aka 541 Amsterdam Avenue, the West Park Presbyterian Church individual landmark. This is a Romanesque revival style church complex designed by Henry Franklin Kilburn and built in 1889 to 1890, which incorporated an existing chapel designed by Leopold Eidlitz and built in 1883 to 85. The application is to demolish the building pursuant to section 25-309B2 on the grounds of hardship. And I'll turn it back to you, Chair Carroll.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Corey. So this application concerns the West Park Presbyterian Church's request to demolish the historic church building, an individual landmark, on the grounds of hardship. The commission held a public hearing on June 14th, 2022, where the application was presented and public testimony was heard and submitted. We then held a public meeting on July 19th, 2022, where the applicant responded to the testimony. Some commissioners did a site visit on July of 2022, and in May of 2023, and the staff submitted questions to the applicant on July 28th, 2022. On April 13th, 2023, approximately 8 months after receiving the staff's questions, the applicant responded. We held a second public hearing on June 13th, 2023, to allow the applicant to discuss their responses to the questions and to allow the public to respond to the new information. Staff submitted some follow-up questions on June 19th and on July 3rd of 2023, and the applicant responded on September 5th. At today's public meeting, 2 consultants retained by the LPC to help the commissioners analyze the applicant's materials concerning repair and cost of repairing and using the building will present their findings and will also be available for questions. And I will now turn it over to Mark Silverman to discuss the hardship standards.
Can we have the first slide, Addie? We should have had that up earlier. This is the chronology. Commissioners, before the consultants present their reports, I'd like to say a few words about the hardship provisions of the landmarks law and where we are in the process. Section 25-309 of the law provides relief in the situation where compliance with the landmarks law imposes a hardship on a property owner. It allows the commission to permit inappropriate work where compliance with the no effect and appropriateness standards of the law impose a hardship. In that situation, the commission issues a notice to proceed. The hardship provision is an important part of the statute and ensures the law isn't unconstitutional as applied. There have been 19 hardship cases since the law was passed, 13 of which have been approved. Of the 19, 6 were by nonprofits, and of those 6, 4 were granted and 2 were denied. The last nonprofit application was by St. Vincent's Hospital in 2009, where the commission approved replacing the O'Toole building with a new hospital. Because St. Vincent's went bankrupt, the building was never demolished. And since the hardship application was submitted in April of 2022, as Chair Carroll has said, we've held 2 public hearings and a public meeting, reviewed the applicant's submissions, received testimony from the public, conducted site visits, and we've done our own inquiries. It is also, the commission has also engaged consultants to assist the commissioners in analyzing the application and other materials. Next slide, please. This application concerns a situation where a nonprofit has entered a contract to sell the building to a third party who intends to demolish the landmark and put up a new building. As part of this transaction, the church would get a 10,000 square foot condominium unit, a theater worship space, on the ground and cellar floors. The sale is contingent upon the LPC either approving the work as appropriate or issuing a notice to proceed under the hardship provisions. This statutory standard contains a 4-part test for this kind of situation. And the first 2 are here, and the next 2 will be on the next slide. The owner of such improvement has entered into a bona fide agreement to sell an estate of freehold or to grant a term of at least 20 years in such improvement, which agreement is subject to or contingent upon the issuance of a certificate of appropriateness or a notice to proceed. Second, the improvement parcel, which includes such improvement as existing at the time of the filing of such request, would not, if it were not exempt in whole or in part from real property taxation, be capable of earning a reasonable return. Next slide, please. Third, such improvement has ceased to be adequate, suitable, or appropriate for use for carrying out both the purposes of such owner to which it is devoted and those purposes to which it has been devoted when acquired, unless such owner is no longer pursuing those purposes. And finally, the 4th factor is the prospective purchaser, in the case of an application to demolish, seeks and intends in good faith to demolish such improvement immediately for the purpose of constructing on the site thereof with reasonable promptness a new building or other facility. Next slide, please. To summarize where we are, I note with respect to the 1st and 4th factors, there appears to be little factual dispute. With respect to the 1st factor, there's no dispute that the applicant has entered a contract with a developer to purchase the property and demolish the building and construct a new building on the property. The contract is contingent upon the commission issuing a certificate of appropriateness or a notice to proceed based on hardship for the demolition. With respect to the 4th factor, the requirement the purchaser seeks and intends in good faith to demolish the building immediately, the record is also clear that in 2018, the church entered into a 5-year lease with the center at West Park to operate the property. That lease expired on December 31st, 2022. The lease gave the center an option for an additional 5-year term.
Excuse me, please do not speak at this time. The public is not able to speak in this public meeting.
Ending on December 31st, 2027. The center exercised its right to extend the lease in February 2022, prior to the applicant filing the hardship application. The church has since sued the center to void the contract. The center is engaged in the contract. That litigation is pending, and both sides have indicated they will appeal. At this moment in time, the church cannot demolish the building, even if it wasn't designated, and depending on the outcome of the litigation, might not be able to be demolished until 2028. With respect to the 3rd factor, whether the improvement has ceased to be, next slide, please. With respect to the 3rd factor, whether the improvement has ceased to be adequate, suitable, or appropriate for use for carrying out the church's charitable purpose, there is mixed testimony. The church notes that the congregation has shrunk to 12. The building is too big for the congregation to maintain. The congregation has expended all its funds trying to maintain the building, that it has been unsuccessful in finding a partner or tenant who can pay for the repairs, and it claims fundraising efforts have yielded little. Members of the public who oppose the application, including the center, have noted that the church continues to function as a place of worship as it has since constructed. According to the lease with the center, the congregation has the right to continue to worship there, although it has chosen to gather virtually since the pandemic, and have art exhibitions. The building was also rented out to another church for worship. Finally, some have noted the lack of a concerted fundraising effort by the congregation. The subject of today's public meeting is primarily the second factor of the statutory test, whether the property, if not exempt from real property taxes, is capable of earning a reasonable return as defined by the law. The applicant proposed 3 development scenarios for analyzing whether the property can earn a reasonable return and argues none of them meet the statutory test. Testimony in opposition argues that the cost of repair and renovation are far less, that the unused development rights have significant value that need to be factored in, that historic preservation tax credits are available and should be factored into the analysis, and that the applicant is not properly applying this statutory test. Slide 6. Commissioners, the law defines reasonable return as the net annual return of 6% of the valuation of an improvement parcel. In this case, this is the lot on which the church exists. That's the improvement parcel. Valuation, with exceptions not applicable here, is the city's assessed value of the property. The net annual return is further defined as, quote, the amount by which the earned income yielded by the improvement parcel during a test year exceeds the operating expenses of such parcel during such year, excluding mortgage interest and amortization and excluding allowances for obsolescence and reserves, but including an allowance for depreciation of 2% of the assessed value of the improvement, exclusive of the land or the amount shown for depreciation of the improvement in the latest required federal income tax return, whichever is lower. The Commission has recognized in previous for-profit hardship applications test, which use the same definition of reasonable return, that if a building must be repaired or modified to determine its earning capacity, that the estimated hard and some soft costs associated with that work can be added to the amount to be depreciated. Put another way, 2% of the estimated renovation costs can be subtracted from a building's income when solving for reasonable return. To use this test, the Commission must make findings concerning the overall income generated by the property, other miscellaneous income reasonably derived from the operation of the property, the value of other assets, such as unused development rights, and various costs incurred in operating the property, including estimated real estate taxes. The Commission then computes whether the sum left over after subtracting the cost from the income and considering the value of other assets is less than 6% of the assessed value of the property. In slide 7. Next slide, thanks. One final note, the reasonable analysis is performed looking at the building as it exists at the time of the application. The Commission has also recognized that sometimes an investment needs to be made to see if a designated building can generate a reasonable return. And therefore, it also looks at reasonable development reuse options. In this situation, as previously noted, the Commission has permitted 2% of the development cost to be considered an expense. With that as background, let me introduce the 2 consultants. Don Freeman is a structural engineer and was asked to review the applicant's materials and give his assessment of the repair and maintenance needs of the building and what was needed to cure the DOB violations that exist against the property. Keith Brennan of Weitzman Associates is an appraiser. He was on a list of appraisers we received from EDC. I want to note for the record that the Commission is his client and he's being paid by the applicant. Mr. Brennan was tasked with reviewing the applicant's materials relating to the 3 development scenarios, including looking at the development assumptions, material costs, and whether the 3 scenarios were capable of earning a reasonable return. He also reviewed materials submitted from the public. He also commented on other options, including the ability of the property as it exists today to earn a reasonable return. With that, I will turn it over to Don Friedman to start. We have to ask Abby.
Thank you, Mark. Commissioners, just a little bit of context. I'm the president of Old Structures Engineering, which is currently under contract with the Landmarks Commission to provide structural engineering review services. I was asked to review the proposed work and the reports on West Park Presbyterian in the summer of 2022. Have done so. I've reviewed several iterations of those documents. I made 2 site visits with both staff and commissioners from the LPC. You've all got my fairly lengthy report, so I'm just going to summarize today. And my background, I'm a structural engineer with 36 years of experience, 34 of which have been in the investigation, design of repairs and design of alterations of existing buildings. In the interest of full disclosure, I've been involved with 2 projects at West Park Presbyterian. There is a report from LZA Technology, which used to be a division of Thornton Tomasetti Engineers from the summer of 2001. And I was involved with that report. I did not write most of it, but I reviewed all of it. And in 2011, Old Structures was hired by the New York Landmarks Conservancy to review conditions at the plaster finishes in the sanctuary. I have not been involved with the church since 2011. Okay. Let's try clicking on that.
Don, I'll advance the slides for you if that's okay, unless you'd prefer.
No, I'd rather not. Okay. This is a good exterior view of the building. The west facade is on the left, the south facade is on the right. The biggest concern with this building in terms of safety is the condition of the sandstone veneer at the exterior. Before I get into this, by the way, my instructions were to review a technical review of the proposed work and the reports, and which includes the cost estimate with regard to public safety. In other words, what would be necessary to make the building safe today and for a reasonable period of time into the future. There is an existing DOB violation, Department of Buildings violation, related to the condition of the sandstone veneer. That's the reason there's a sidewalk shed there. It's important to note the building is not subject to the Department of Buildings Facade Inspection Safety Program, FISP, ordinarily referred to as Local 11 or Local Law 10, because it's technically a 4-story building. FISP kicks in for 7-story buildings and taller. However, the tower of the building is well over 100 feet tall, which means that this building is taller than hundreds of buildings that are subject to FISP. I believe that the FISP program provides a good framework for analyzing the condition of the exterior with relation to safety because of the way that FISP works. It is designed around public safety. The law exists because of falling masonry. It works on a 5-year cycle. It does not matter how much work is performed at this building today. It will need more in the future. Every building, by virtue of being out in the weather, ages and deteriorates. So the question is not what work is necessary to make the building safe forever, because that's not possible. The question is what is necessary to make it safe today and for a reasonable period of time. In addition, there are, and this is true for me in writing any kind of investigative report, there are 3 rough conditions, 3 grades that can be applied to a structure. I'm excluding safe. Everybody knows safe exists. One of them is unsafe today, immediately hazardous. The second is something that is not currently unsafe, but will be in the foreseeable future. FISP refers to this as safe with a repair and maintenance program. And the last is something that is not unsafe, is not about to become unsafe, but is deterioration. The fact is you can look at any facade and find some damage. That doesn't mean that all of that damage is dangerous. So those 3 categories are enshrined in the law and also provide, I believe, a good way of looking at this. Next slide, please. The exterior walls of the building are structurally brick. The 2 street facades have, can we get the next slide? Okay, there you go. The 2 street facades have sandstone veneer. As you can see very clearly in the picture on the left, there are 2 types of stone. There is a darker brown stone that makes up the field of the wall. It is, as brownstone goes, relatively hard. Brownstone is not a good stone for our climate, to be blunt about it. That stone makes up most of the wall. The other stone is this redder stone that is used for the carved ornament areas. And it is much softer and has deteriorated quite badly in places. A good way of thinking of this is that the brown stone makes up most of the wall, but the red stone makes up most of the dangerous conditions. Next slide, please. Thank you. These are pictures from the report by Facade Maintenance and Design, which is a member of the development team, showing a probe at the exterior wall. The Facade MD report states that the brownstone veneer is 4 to 5 inches thick. That's its minimum thickness. It is thicker in places. As you can see in the picture on the right, the stone there is 8 inches thick. The probes show that there are occasional metal ties between the veneer and the backup. They are not everywhere, excuse me. But I think it's important to note that there is no evidence and there has been no discussion of separation between the veneer and the backup. In other words, the wall is holding together reasonably well as a whole. What is happening is that the exterior of the brownstone is deteriorating and in some cases breaking off. Next slide, please. You've seen this picture before, about 5 minutes ago. I want to draw, let me see if I can see the cursor. Yeah. Right there, we have what's either a very large dormer or a very small cross gable on the south facade. And the triangular portion of that wall, the pediment portion of that wall, is tilted outwards rather noticeably. It has separated from the roof framing behind it. Water was actually getting in. I think work has been done to remediate that. But that piece of wall is tilted outwards. I'd like to point out that that piece of wall is not particularly well supported at the base. Roughly a third of its bottom, of the bottom of the triangle, is above the round window. And this is actually a fairly common defect in church buildings of the 19th century. That wall was not very well tied to the roof. There's a ratchet effect. Basically, that wall is not structurally tied to the roof in what we consider today to be a proper manner. Under environmental forces, wind suction being the most important, it can move in and out a bit, but it can't really move in because if it does, it runs into the roof framing. So over time, it can move out, can't move back. It starts to move out more. Once it's tilted, there's now a gravity moment forcing it outwards. It's the kind of damage that begins very slowly and accelerates over time. Next slide, please. There is a DOB violation, by the way, specifically for that wall being tilted. And it is damage that is not currently dangerous. That wall is not going to fall today. However, it will continue to move and it will fall at some point if not addressed. This is a sketch from several associates, also part of the development team, showing their proposed work. And I'm not going to go through all of those notes. What it boils down to is they are attempting to tie the gable and wall, and you can see the triangle above the yellow circle of the window. They're attempting to tie that across the width of the church using steel. And basically, there are two sets of tie rods up near the top of the roof trusses, and those are gable trusses there, and this is a large truss below them. There are sort of lower tie rods, and then there are these steel girts that continue all the way down to the bottom. Oh, even better, thank you. Thank you. So we've got tie rods up here, tie rods down here, and this steel that's connecting those tie rods to the wall. Next slide, please. This is a cross section through the church. There's the sort of gable truss. There's the lower truss. We've got tie rods up here. We've got tie rods down here. I just want to make an important point. There's a discussion in the structural report that this wall is being pushed outwards because of the thrust of the main roof. If you note, the main roof rafters come down at the bottom of that triangle. They can't possibly be exerting force up here. More importantly, that rafter is supported here, here, and here. You get thrust in a gable roof when the rafters are only supported at a ridge board and at the eave. That's not the case here. There is no outward thrust under gravity load from those rafters. So the explanation for the gable and wall movement is not inherent in the structure of the roof. It's inherent in the lack of ties between the wall and the roof structure. Just to continue on this for a second. So the roof ties are up here. These girts continue all the way down. The girts are channels laid flat against the wall. They are much less stiff than the wall is. They are not going to do very much to restrain it. In short, the work below the eave, but the level 3, as it's called here, is not very effective. Next slide, please. So this is a very short summary of the scope of work that was priced, for which there's a long cost estimate. If you count the amount of stones in the cost estimate, it appears that all of the veneer stones that are damaged are being replaced in their entirety. There are pins being put in to tie the veneer back to the brick. The pins are twice as frequent as required by code. They are not as required by code for a new wall. They are not required by code at all in this case, unless there is damage because the building is grandfathered in its current state. If there were separation between the veneer and the backup, they would obviously be called for. As I've just discussed, we have 2 sets of steel ties running across the building, including those steel girts that run from the first floor all the way up to the top of the roof. And I didn't discuss this in detail, but there is full restoration of all of the art glass windows, which is most of the windows in the building. That is the scope of work that was priced out in the April 2023 documents that I reviewed. Next slide, please. So what I've done for the alternate scope of work, and I did this specifically to look at the cost, is what work is necessary to make the building safe today and for a 5 to 10 year horizon, knowing that more work will have to be done. If you spend more work today, you will reduce the amount needed in 10 years. If you perform more work now, you will reduce the amount needed in 10 years, but you will not eliminate it. So right now, the question is, how do we make the building safe? How could that be done? If you have veneer stones that have some erosion, particularly the harder brownstone, there's not necessarily any work at all that needs to be done. When the loss of material is deep enough, as it is at some of the carved red stone, that threatens the stability of the veneer, that needs to be addressed. It does not need to be addressed necessarily with a full stone replacement. The stones can be patched. That should be loose, obviously. You can remove loose material. You can use alternate materials to replace the stone. One of the reasons to avoid full stone replacement where possible is that requires shoring of the veneer, which is a slow and expensive process. Where that can be eliminated, it should be if we're interested only in current safety. Pins are needed at replacement stones, arguably by code and certainly by logic. They are not necessarily needed anywhere that there is no sign of movement of the veneer relative to the backup, and that's pretty much everywhere. In my analysis of the structural work, I kept the scope of work as shown in those 2 sketches a few slides back. I removed items that appear to be superfluous, such as fireproofing of steel in an unrated building. If you were to tie the wall to the roof and tie the wood members of the roof together with light gauge wood connectors that are used in wood construction today, you could eliminate most of the structural work as currently shown. I believe the cost, simply in eliminating the superfluous work in the structural portion, the cost dropped by about 50%. If you were to go to a more carefully designed repair, I believe you could reduce that by another 50%. Looking at the report on the art glass, most of the windows are not unsafe. Therefore, and the scope that was priced was full restoration of all of them, including double glazing. If you were to change that to simply restoring or putting a storm window in front of the windows that are currently unsafe, you could again greatly reduce that scope. One last comment about the existing Department of Buildings violations. They do not say, this stone is unsafe. DOB violations don't work that way, as I suspect you all know. So part of doing repair in a building like this is to say to the building department, here are the unsafe conditions we intend to address, and here is our plan for future work. rather than here's a plan to do everything today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions for Don Friedman? Okay, I don't see any questions. Yes, Commissioner Chu.
The structure at the base of the masonry wall, you're saying, how is the bearing condition of that wall?
The bearing condition
Of the wall and the foundation?
there's no evidence of a problem.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Goldblum.
Was it in your scope of work to reevaluate the pricing associated with the work?
It was not in my scope to produce an estimate from scratch, which is probably just as well. I don't necessarily have independent sources of unit costs. What I did in reviewing the pricing was to keep the unit costs of the estimate that I was reviewing. I was looking at changes to the scope rather than, so, it doesn't mean I have no questions about the unit costs or the markups, but I accepted them as given and simply changed the scope to be, as I've discussed, safety first only.
And when you had an area where they didn't have scope, like for instance, alternate material or repairs of the stone instead of replacement in kind, did you substitute your own number for that?
No, let me just think about that for a second. I actually, my estimate may be high for that because I basically kept their costs for the stone. I reduced the number of.
You're assuming that you're going to use alternate materials. You kept the higher number just to be safe.
Yes. In addition, the cost of the stone itself isn't necessarily a driving factor in the overall cost. So I don't know that substitution of alternate materials, I think that would make it faster and easier to build. I don't know that it would make it all that much cheaper.
Well, but the issue of the shoring that you mentioned, if you're not going to shore a stone that you're going to, let's say, reface with stucco or cement stucco or something like that, or you're going to Dutchman in a piece on top, that's going to affect the cost significantly, no?
Yes, which I did not take that discount.
So given all of your safety suspenders and belts, what was your price versus what was their price in terms of just like kind of gross numbers?
Good thing I brought those extra pages with me. Hold on one second.
Because that's obviously going to be part of the next conversation that we have.
My cost for immediate safety work, and this is everything. This is structure, masonry, and glass, is roughly $1,700,000. My cost for the entire project, doing that and then doing the rest of the work that is known at this time, would be another $5 million. So a total of $6,700,000. That was for the masonry work. If you include the glass, the overall total gets up to a little over $9 million. Their estimate for the entire, and that includes markup. Their estimate for the entire project was 26 million plus.
So their number was 26 million today.
Yes.
Your number is 1.7 million today with other
seven
the next few years.
7.3 over the next, let's say, 10 years.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Holford Smith, followed by Vice Chair Bland.
So your immediate safety work of 1.7 million, what is your length of time do you think that would hold? How many years?
I'm saying 5 to 10 years. You would probably have some minor masonry work at 5 years. I'm assuming that there will be cyclical review of the conditions and maintenance going forwards.
All right, Vice Chair Bland.
Did I understand that the steel that was being proposed by the applicant to mitigate the issues, the structural issues, are not needed, that it's all wood? Did I hear that?
The steel scheme as shown contains quite a bit of work that I believe to be superfluous. The work below the eave has no clear purpose. Going forward, the way that you ordinarily would stabilize a gable end wall in a church is to fasten it to the wood roof structure and make sure that the wood roof structure, the pieces are fastened to one another more positively than they are today. That can be done with steel. It can be done with light gauge connectors that are used in wood framing. There would be much less steel in a scheme of that type. I'm not going to say zero necessarily, but not a great deal.
Thank you.
Commissioner Chapin, followed by Commissioner Ginsburg.
Yeah, in your report, you addressed asbestos, that they had looked to see, we're expecting asbestos removal, which you thought, would you comment on that?
The structural scope of work included, I believe it was $200,000 for asbestos mitigation. There was no, it explicitly says that they don't know of any asbestos, but based on the age of the building, they're assuming there will be. I found that comment odd because 19th century buildings tend to have much less asbestos than early 20th century buildings. There's no mechanical to speak of in the attic that would have asbestos fireproofing or wrapping. The plaster typically in the 19th century does not have asbestos in it. It was unclear to me where the asbestos was expected, and since it has not been found, I removed that as basically speculative.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Ginsburg.
You have two cost numbers, one for work now and one that needs to be done within 10 years. Are there any efficiencies or cost savings to do all the work at one time versus breaking it up?
There's some. If you do it all now, you save on scaffolding, for example. I should point out that the most recent cost estimate from Leading Builders Group, who's the estimator for the development group, broke up the work into 6 phases. And their phase 1 is roughly the equivalent of my immediate phase. So you save on scaffolding, you save on design costs and so on. There's not necessarily all that much other savings. There's not a lot of efficiency because the stones that you're working on now are ones that are not the same stones you'd be working on in 10 years. And therefore, other than the access, there's no savings there.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Holford Smith.
So after the immediate work is done, you feel that the sidewalk bridge can be removed safely?
That's the goal. The immediate work was defined as what is necessary to cure the violations and create a safe condition under FISP rules, which is to say safe or swarm categories.
Like most buildings.
Like most masonry buildings on the Upper West Side.
All right. Other questions? Okay, not seeing any other questions, and Commissioner Chapin doesn't have her hand up. Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you, Don Friedman. We'll now hear from Keith Brennan. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Keith Brennan. I'm with Weitzman Associates. I'm a principal and managing director at the firm. Weitzman is a real estate investment and development advisory firm focusing on the marketability, financial feasibility, and valuation of real estate projects in New York City and throughout the country. Our task here today, if we skip to the next slide, from the Landmarks Commission was to review the documents that have been presented by the applicants for the subject property, to review the assumptions in particular that they used in their analyses and determine their relevance and their reasonableness for a project of this type, to review if there was any additional market data, comparable information that would have led to adjustments or changes to the applicant's assumptions, and determine whether the methodology that they were utilizing was reasonable, to review the potential of transferable development rights at the subject property and what opportunity there might be with those. And very importantly, to collaborate with Cumming, who was engaged as well as part of our initial scope to determine what the reasonableness of the construction cost estimate that was prepared. Weitzman is not a cost estimator. We are not a project manager. We don't get involved directly into the construction world. And so we can focus on the revenue, we can focus on the expenses, we can focus on the proposed improvements, but we cannot, nor do we have the expertise to estimate, construction costs. Cumming, who is involved in numerous projects in New York City worth billions of dollars of construction contracts let each year, does have that expertise. And so they were engaged to assist in terms of that review. On to the next slide. Our other cause was to review the 3 scenarios that were presented by the applicant to determine if there were other scenarios that should be utilized and prepare an analysis on those scenarios. This also potentially included a phased approach for the deferred maintenance and the rehabilitation costs of the building from a marketability and from a financial feasibility perspective, not from a constructability nor from a cost perspective. And then, as well as during this time period when we were engaged in late summer of 2022 to determine if there was any other testimony or hearings or additional documents that were provided by the applicant to address. And then a review of their claim of financial hardship subject to the existing laws, as well as a review of the April 2022 documents from FX Collaborative as it relates to the floor plans and the layout and the functionality of what was being proposed by the applicant. The next slide, please. Again, the primary task here was to focus on the merits and reasonableness of appraisers and planners report that was submitted in April of 2023 on behalf of the applicant. Next slide. Within that April 2023 document, there were 3 redevelopment scenarios that were focused. One was the base scenario, effectively a redevelopment of the existing facility, given its current floor plan, given its current demising walls, and given its current vertical ingress and egress and stairs. The second scenario took that same concept of a commercial or community facility use and looked to maximize the square footage, particularly in the sanctuary space. This added approximately 4,000 square feet to the rentable area that the project would have had at the time. And then the third scenario was to look at a multifamily scenario, which also included the infill of the sanctuary space and proposed layouts of approximately 20 residential rental units that would have been made available to the market. Next slide, please. As Mr. Silverman had explained earlier, our focus here again was on the financial hardship application, and I take from the appraisers and planners report on page 6, where it talks about the path and the process of determining the net operating income and whether that net operating income would lead to a required rate of return that would have been in excess of 6%. Next slide, please. Focused on the base scenario and the infill scenarios, which largely keep the building from a commercial or a community facility use perspective. Appraisers and planners used a market rent estimate of $50 per square foot of rentable area. That is all of the square footage in the building per the FX plans that were deemed to be rentable, not occupiable, but not usable, but rentable and revenue producing. It is our opinion that that $50 estimate, based on the work that would have been done and the layout of the building as proposed in FX's floor plans, would have been reasonable at the time of 2022 and into 2023 as well. If there weren't adjustments to those interiors and the property would stay largely as is, that $50 per square foot would not be reasonable. The applicant, we felt, could do a further study of a food hall use, given its location, given the nature of the ground floor plan. However, that would far exceed the cost estimates that were already put into the building, making the building much more expensive than originally proposed. And the rents at this particular time would not justify that for such a use. The projected operating expenses we felt were in line with market expectations for buildings of this size and type, both on a per square foot basis as well as on a percent of revenue basis. In fact, there was the observation by ourselves that the reserves could be slightly higher and the management fees were low in terms of the applicant's percentage that they were utilizing. Cumming did a thorough research and review of the redevelopment costs that were presented by LBG, and we'll get into it in a further slide here. They did their own cost analysis based upon the scope that was presented to them and came up with similar yet slightly higher numbers, determining that the the cost figures, the hard cost figures utilized by the appraisers and planners report via LBG were appropriate. In the three scenarios, or excuse me, for the base scenario and the infill scenario in particular, neither scenario achieves a positive net operating income before even the deduction of real estate taxes. Next slide, please. And this is just an example of that. This is a replication of the appraisers and planners document. It is also presented in our report. And at the bottom, you can see that in both cases for the base scenario and the infill scenario, the net operating income before the deduction of real estate taxes was negative. Next slide, please. In the multifamily scenario, we had a few additional observations. We felt that the market rents that were being utilized by the appraisers and planners in their pro forma and in their report were on the low end of the range. Given the fact that there's a fairly significant renovation projected to occur in the multifamily scenario, this would be new products. Granted, it would still be on the first, second, and third floors, but it would be new product. And so from that perspective, we made some adjustments to those rents. In this slide, you'll see everything that is adjusted is in red font, with the appraisers and planners market rent to the left, and then the red font being our adjustments to those market rents. Those market rents for the various unit types were based on not only the rent per square foot, but also the chunk rent, or the rent that people would be paying for a studio, for a 1-bedroom, for a 2-bedroom in similar buildings on the Upper West Side near this location. Next slide, please. One other comment that we had on the proposed floor plan is this is the ground floor as proposed, and the applicant uses a rather large amenity space, a little bit over 2,400 square feet. The fenestration is not great. The depth of the space is not very good either. However, we felt it was appropriate that that is rentable space. It could be a large, graciously designed residential unit, and so we included that square footage and the rentable square foot under the multifamily scenario. Next slide, please. And so with this scenario, we did make some additional adjustments. You'll see everything in red, and the applicant uses 20 units. With the addition of the amenity space, we are now at 21 units. We've adjusted the average market rent, which leads to a higher revenue for the project. We've also made some slight adjustments to the management and leasing expense, as well as the reserve to replacement expense. In this scenario as well, we end up with a still negative number before the deduction of real estate taxes. Next slide, please. Again, the construction cost estimates were based on the scope that was provided. And so Cumming presented their cost estimate for scenario 1, scenario 2, and scenario 3 based upon their review of the costs. We'll note that the LBG number on the left there is from April of 2023. The Cumming number is from August of 2023. Next slide, please. We did review the documentation that had been exchanged both in the early April 2022 meetings as well as subsequent to that as it relates to the use and availability of historic tax credits. In general, we agree with the conclusion reached by appraisers and planners. These are very speculative. These tax credits are becoming even more and more difficult to monetize and to have varying tax authorities agree to. And so also given the issues of the location of the project and the overall impact, we would agree with the conclusion reached by appraisers and planners. We did also include additional lease comparables in the marketplace to support what the commercial and community facility rent assumptions were that by appraisers and planners. There were north of 20 additional leases that we were able to uncover. Those are presented in Exhibit A of our report. And when we make adjustments for the quality and location of the space, they're in line with where the market rent projection is. As it relates to the sale of transferable development rights, we've read the documents that have been provided throughout the process. We've also taken our own internal review. Dr. Marie Danielle Fauché of our office, who focuses on TDRs and air right transfers within New York City as an appraiser and as a consultant, went through that process. That's also presented in our report. Next slide, please. An analysis that we were asked to take by the commission was to look at if the reduction of the restoration costs at 50 and 75% of the amounts that were presented at LBG, and what that impact would be if we were to reduce those costs at 75%, or a reduction of 25% to get to a 75% of the projected amount, or a reduction of 50% for the restoration costs and include the remaining cost thereafter, if that would yield positive net operating income in any of the scenarios. And only in the, we start to get close in the multifamily scenario, but in phase one, scenario one and scenario two, we still remain negative at that approach. Next slide, please. Another analysis and calculation that were asked for Mr. Friedman when his report was made available to us most recently would be if we were to utilize the cost that Mr. Friedman proposes to stabilize the building and return it to its foreign shell, and do the same similar analysis. So no work has been done to the interiors of the building, flooring, walls, plumbing, heating, mechanicals, anything along those lines, or rather just implementing the 9 million and change number from Mr. Friedman, and then putting a rent here. And instead of what we did here is we solved for the minimum rent that would need to be achievable. But at the bottom line, post real estate tax, we'd be able to get it 6.0%.
Brendan, because we're on Zoom, if you could stay by the mic, that would be very helpful. And there is a pointer right there. Yeah.
Right here. Right. So in here, we're solving for what is the minimum rent that would be required with these costs. And then at the end of the day, the return would be 6.0%. So it is a bit of a functional analysis that's a bit iterative. But that would require a rent of $37.76, assuming that the interior stays as it is today, and assuming that 95% of that square footage is leased. Next slide, please. And so based on our review of the submitted materials to date, our expertise in the underwriting of development and redevelopment opportunities in Manhattan, New York City, and beyond, and the peer review performed by Cumming, it's our opinion that the calculations and the analyses and the reasonable return analysis as presented by our appraisers and planners are supported and are reasonable given the scope and the project that's been proposed. Next slide, please. Happy to answer any questions.
All right. Thank you very much. Commissioners, questions? Yes, Commissioner Vice Chair Bland.
Why a rental and not a condo? Is that?
It's a good question. The challenge there is a condo sellout or a sellout of residential condominiums leads to a lump sum of money. And the hardship claim is based on an annualized 6% return. That 6% return is an assumption that goes into perpetuity. And under for sale condominium analysis, you end up with a lump sum of money up front. Based on our interpretation of the methodology for the hardship application, a for sale sellout would not be appropriate.
But it's a methodology issue.
And if I can just jump in here, he was not asked to do it as well because at this moment in time, he was analyzing for what the applicants had proposed, and they had chosen not to do a sellout. So that's still one of those unknowns at this time.
Correct.
And is it true that I think I once knew this and have forgotten perhaps tax credits have to be for rental, or can it be for a sale?
There are certain tax credits that are available for sale condominiums, but they are far less. And the market for those on the investor side is far less. And the proof of burden to the IRS, particularly as it relates to the facade, is far greater. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Master.
Hello. I actually reviewed your numbers and I thought that most of them were very good. I had a quick question. I know that you said that the management and leasing was low on their numbers, and their numbers, I think it said 6%. And yet your numbers, I think you raised it, but your numbers turned into 5%. Can you clarify?
Right, we broke up some of the management fee and the leasing activity.
Okay. And then I just wanted to address what you said about the food hall as an option. I understand that you said that the build out cost was going to be excessive, which I agree with. The other thing is that because we're still retaining the exterior of the church, I'm not sure a food hall would be appropriate in this venue, right? And then I also wanted to say that we looked at a scenario where we leave the space as is. And in order to do the 6% reasonable return, I think you said you had to get $37 a square foot for rent.
Yes.
But isn't it true that if you leased it to a nonprofit group and it's owned by the church as a nonprofit group, that the real estate taxes would be exempt from rent?
I don't know specifically. We would have to look into that.
If I can just jump in there. So without answering that question, but I assume the answer would be it would be exempt. But the law asks the question, definition of a reasonable return is for a nonprofit, can you get a 6% return if you are paying real estate tax?
Okay.
So
Understood.
that's where the catch is. And yes, I'm good. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I think that was it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg.
You may not know this, but particularly for the residential option, would there need to be additional windows cut in the facade that would then need to be reviewed by us as a discretionary action?
I do know this. The floor plans provided need additional penetrations through the facade to provide the proper light and air to make a marketable layout of the residential units on the upper floors.
Thank you.
And commissioners, if I can, and that was one of the reasons that the applicant and Mr. Brennan concluded that tax credits were probably unlikely, given the sheer number of windows that would need to be put into the facade.
Yes, Commissioner Goldblum.
Okay, so in your analysis of Don Friedman's, when you're mixing that in, got your $36 a foot number, that was on the assumption that you're spending the 9 million right up front.
Yes.
Now Don had said that really only 1.7 million was needed up front. How would that affect the rent required? That the 9 million was really kind of a best case, do it all at once number.
We would look into that. However, given that you need to spend the 9 million would be the relevant number to use in our opinion.
I thought that he said that 1.7 was the number that you needed to spend, really. Did I miss something about that? Am I misunderstanding that? He said the 1.7 was what you needed to make the building safe.
I think the issue is, and if Don is here, he can jump in. Don said that you need the 1.7 to remove the shed. And I think the rest of that scope of work was to sort of address existing conditions that you would need to address over the next couple of years. So I think that the 1.7 is to get rid of the shed, but then you would need to ultimately do the other work pretty quickly. So that's why he solved for that.
And what is the current tenant paying per foot?
Which tenant? The center?
Whatever tenants they have, yeah.
We were presented with 7 leases. I believe it's 7. One with the center and 6 or 7 additional subleases. The subleases ranged anywhere from 30 to, I actually have them here, just a second. The subleases range from $15 per square foot to a little bit over to $40.54 per square foot. Those were for 6 subleases, all of which have expired, and they were for square footages ranging from 296 square feet up to 1,943 square feet.
And those are all numbers.
So
I will remind everyone again, this is a public meeting. This is not an open session, so please be respectful. You can certainly submit any comments in writing. We have received numerous letters already, and we will be keeping the record open for 2 more weeks. So we're happy to welcome those written responses, and we will review them, but please respect the process today.
So why then, if they did get numbers that were north of your target, and those numbers are not necessarily, the most current, why would you assume that 37 is an unreachable number for them?
The assumption is 37 is an unreachable number for the entirety of the square footage. The leases that are for those $30 to $45, $54 per, $45 per square foot are for less than 1,000 square feet. And in many cases, less than 500 square feet.
And were they made for such a small amount because that's like the best space in the building, or was it because were there other reasons, factors that, you know, mitigated their ability to rent the whole building?
I could not answer that question.
Okay, thanks. And the note, the $37 a foot being an unreachable one was based on an analysis of similar rentals of public assembly community facility buildings.
Community facility leases throughout the city, particularly Manhattan, as well as the current condition of the space during our walkthrough in 2022.
Thank you.
And if I can just add in here, so if you could go to slide 15, please. There is a note on the slide that I think Mr. Weitzman didn't go into. There was a bunch of caveats based on the leases and the reality of those leases that I think were caveats to his conclusion about whether you could meet that 3750. And those included that, it's a complicated situation. The entire building is leased to the West Park Center for West Park. They in turn are subleasing. Those sublease lessees need to be doing something that the church doesn't disapprove of. So those leases don't necessarily, the numbers don't necessarily tell you what it could bear if it was a simpler leasing situation. So that's just a caveat to that notion that you might not be able to meet that. Yeah.
So with that in mind, do you think that the restrictions that the church has placed have hamstrung it from being able to make the number that they want to make? If you imagine a scenario where they didn't have those complexities, would it, and obviously, and if you imagine a scenario where you've spent the money and you've gotten rid of the scaffolding, do you think that would affect your numbers?
We would have to look into it. We asked for all existing leases, all existing leasing activity from the center, and we were provided the 6 subleases and the master lease.
But I mean, you're saying here that part of the negative factor is the church and its complications. The other part is the building's got the scaffolding on it, but we're assuming that we're going to take care of the reasons for the scaffolding, which would take away one problem. And I'm not sure how we would, I don't know how we would second guess the church's evaluations of potential tenants. I mean, we would not be in a position, I would assume, to judge whether or not a potential tenant was, that they were being overly restrictive or not. That's kind of their business, I guess. It's I don't know. I mean, it seems like it'd be worth asking the question to you to imagine a more realistic scenario where, yes, the shed is removed because we are spending that $1.7 or $9 million, and that the complexities of the rental situation could be simplified if the church were truly incentivized to do so, which clearly now they're not because they're doing all this. Would that be a reasonable request for us to make of our consultant?
Yes, I think we should definitely include all of our questions.
Sarah, I need to just correct something for the record.
Okay.
So Mr. Brennan said that the leases were the leases he received were the ones that we had asked from the applicant and from the center and gotten. That's incorrect. We got those leases were leases that we did ask the center for lease information. It took them a very, very long time to give us any of that information. We just started getting it this week and last week. So those leases were information that we got from the litigation going on in between the two parties. So I just want to correct that he made a statement that wasn't correct. It did not come necessarily from but it is stuff that's in the litigation, and those are real leases that we've since seen those copies and what the center has given us. But just so we're clear, so
having looked at those leases and kind of as someone who knows a whole lot more about this process than we do, is it your view that the restrictions that have been placed on the rentals have been, I don't know, I mean, unduly restrictive is an opinion that's hard to kind of qualify, but there's a line between making restrictions because you think that there's a programmatic or theological or some other legitimate reason not to let somebody rent the building. And then there are more nefarious reasons why, you know, I'm trying to get out of this building myself, so I don't want to really do anything to make a lot of money on it. Was there any view of the leases that you received that might indicate that they were overly restrictive, even beyond what you would imagine would be acceptable for a religious institution?
No, I think that, just to be clear, the restrictions that we're talking about are restrictions that are referenced in the lease between the congregation and the Center for West Park. Okay, so they're basically just saying, we don't want, that there's that the church has some ability to veto or change or whatever. So the leases that are there are leases that were deemed okay. And so I think that the point of the caveat here is that we have a very complicated leasing scenario with, the congregation leasing to the West Park, and they're responsible for subleasing and running, but there are restrictions to who they could theoretically rent for. So it's a very complicated thing. And I have no opinion whatsoever about how those restrictions have in fact, or did in fact, or may in fact have affected anything. The point is that they could, and it's one of the caveats that we have to consider when looking at this conclusion of, could this building achieve that $37.76? It's perhaps an unknown at this point. Okay.
So I think that the question I would ask to the consultant would be to imagine a scenario or evaluate a scenario where Park West was out of the picture. You had the church, you had an empty building, and they want to use it on Sundays, and the rest of the time it's free. What is a reason? And there's no scaffolding, and the building is safe. What are the analyses of rent in that scenario?
Okay, that's.
I'm sorry, but
yes, wait, let me just, for the record, just for the Zoom participants, this is Commissioner Stephen Chu.
All right. Mr. Brennan, I don't know if you had already mentioned it or showed it in one of your slides, but based on your analysis of the existing condition without spending a lot of capital to renovate the interior, what is your assessment of the value of that rent market comparison?
Correct.
Yeah.
It would be well below $30 a foot. A community facility user, typically in Manhattan or Brooklyn or Queens.
Under 37, you said.
Correct.
But do you have a sense of what?
Typically, we would look at this further, but a community facility tenant, no matter whether they're in Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, what have you, typically is put in a place where their rent needs to be $20 to $25 per square foot. That rent level would have to be for 95% of this building. Right. So that is approximately, approximately this figure here of $658,000 that the building would need to generate to make a 6% return with Mr. Friedman's construction cost estimate.
Okay, so based on your assumption of the 9 million, which was listed earlier, the cost of renovation would have to be like less than half of that, more than half of that number.
I'm sorry.
In order for the numbers to work, you got 37 based on a 9 million renovation
Correct.
Scope. So to get a 25, you need to spend less than that, maybe 6 million or 5.5 million in renovation.
I would have to do the calculations to know for sure.
Just trying to understand.
And I think that's an interesting point, because if Don is really saying 1.7 is all you need,
yes,
all of a sudden the rent goes down way more than
changes
half.
the picture. Yes.
And just so we're clear, the issue here is not that the tenants would be limited to a nonprofit or a community use. It could be.
Right.
Okay. So I just think we're
Exactly.
clear.
Yeah, this scenario assumes the whole full market, not subject to restrictions of the existing lease.
Correct. Okay.
And just to clarify, this scenario assumes the 9 million on the exterior, but keeping the interior as is and no change.
Not a
on-
single dollar is spent on the inside.
Okay, and would that be 37, you would need to make $37 per square foot for the entire building, not just portions of the building?
Correct.
Okay, Commissioner Ginsburg?
So I had two questions. I presume if the ownership change and the use was a community facility, they'd have to meet at least certain handicapped accessibility requirements and potentially fire safety requirements. You did not price that in at all.
That is not presented in our numbers, and we would have to look to a third party to validate that.
And then the other question is, those 6 leases, did that make up leasing the entire building or just part of it?
That was a small portion.
Thank you.
All right, other questions?
Sorry, sir. I just got to be clarified what Mr. Brennan just said. His analysis of the 3 scenarios did include bringing them up, upgrading them with stuff. Okay, it's just this last one.
Yes.
This one does not. So that's why I just want to make sure the record is clear. That's right. And I would also just point out that never mind.
Commissioner Master?
I just wanted to make a statement that, the space is quite significant. And, based on my work with some nonprofit groups, depending on their funding, a high number of them actually require that the space that they lease be ADA compliant. So I think that's also a factor here. I actually wanted to go back, and I think in your report, you had talked about a scenario that I don't think the applicant explored, but it was a partial demolition and new construction. Perhaps we can look into that a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about that scenario?
Sure. In some of the documents that were presented by FX from the architectural side, there were examples of cantilevered buildings that were built that effectively went over the sanctuary component. We didn't have enough specific information to test that scenario, nor the reasonableness of that scenario. That scenario does presume a for sale product versus a rental product, but that would have to be further explored.
All right, other questions?
I think that'd be an interesting thing to pursue, actually, because I think if you look at, BBB just did one on East 86, didn't they? Didn't we just approve something like that a few years ago? Where we, whatever. He didn't hear it, but yeah, I think that's the real scenario that you'd be looking at here. If that would be the most reasonable one, would be to really max out on the residential component. Their analysis, their proposals were rather, tight. And I think that it might be worth it for us to look at those one more time and think about, and it's a weird thing because we're kind of, by looking at a potential layout of that nature, you're kind of indicating would this be approved? And the answer is we don't know until it's submitted. But I think it's worth, for the sake of the argument, looking at the most aggressive thing we could imagine short of demolition, that would provide the most floor area for rental, high-end rental, market rate rental that the site could support. I think it's worth looking at from a financial point of view.
Okay. Other thoughts or questions? Yes, Vice Chair Bland.
I'm not sure how relevant this is, but it's going around in my mind. I had a deep involvement with trying to save St. Anne and the Holy Trinity in Brooklyn Heights for many years long ago. And I'm just wondering, I know the story there pretty well, but I'm wondering if there are other examples of churches with very much smaller congregations than ever before, with significant architecturally important buildings to conserve and preserve, that we might learn from. I'm thinking of one in, forgot the name of it. It's off Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn. And it has a dance studio where Galeen, the well-known dance group, is. And I'm just wondering if there are others like that we might. I know everything is unique, really, in this case, and we should kind of remember that. But there might be other examples around the city that could help us understand how these other churches, synagogues perhaps as well, have been able to maintain themselves without going through this dire prospect of a demolition.
Okay. And of course, I think that there are a number of churches that have, sorry, Commissioner Holford Smith. I just wanted to kind of follow up on Vice Chair Bland's comment, though, that I think that we've seen a number of churches that have sold their building, sold the building, and then we've approved an adaptive reuse after the fact. Commissioner Holford Smith.
It's a really good example. I don't believe it's a landmark, but it's a good example of saving the church and building a building sort of around the church, the French Evangelical Church on 16th Street. So they were able to restore the facade. I don't know what they did on the interior, but there's a new development that sort of wraps around it.
Also 583 Park, also Cipriani. In the case of 583 Park, it is still a church, and it's a catering facility. They're the same people who I think who run the one under the bridge on the east side, the vaults. I forget the name. But yeah, someone talking to somebody from Cipriani would be very interesting. That's kind of their thing. They have several buildings, of course, that have been successfully modified that are individual landmarks. Yeah, I thought that the summary dismissal of the notion of an event space on the Upper West Side, where I don't think there are a lot of them like that just struck me as like curious.
All right, Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, I was just thinking that a lot of the churches we've seen, which have been fairly successful, have one of the components has been a preschool program. So I just throw that into the mix.
Okay. Other questions? All right, commissioners, we're going to take a number of the questions that we've heard today and I think package them up for the consultants. If you have further questions, please forward them to us. As I mentioned, this is a public meeting, as these are our consultants reporting to us on their findings. But as always, we welcome any written comments. And as you know, we did receive a number of letters in advance of today from the Historic Districts Council, the New York Landmarks Conservancy, 31 individuals in opposition to the application, 1 individual in support of the application. And we will continue to welcome comments up until close of business day on November 14th. And so with that, yes, Commissioner Goldblum.
Would it be worth it for us to, I don't know if it's within our ability or budget or anything, to have somebody look at the FX schemes from our side, just like we looked at the economics and the structures? There might be a different view as to how one could develop a landmark district building in a more market feasible way. I mean, their analysis was that these buildings would be too small and a lot of loss factor and therefore not economical. I'm not sure I buy it. It might be worth it if it were possible for us to ask someone like, an architectural Don Friedman to take a look at that kind of thing.
Okay. That's really related to that last topic we've been talking about. We can look into that. So I want to thank Mr. Friedman and Mr. Brennan today for advising us. And as I said, we'll continue to welcome written comments. up until November 14th. And we'll move on to the next item now.
Okay, we'll now be moving to public meeting item number 2, LPC 23-09351. This is an application for certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 209, Lot 1, 277 Canal Street, aka 277 to 289 Canal Street, and 418 to 422 Broadway in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District Extension. This is a Renaissance Revival style theater, store, and loft building designed by David M. Oltarsh and built in 1927 to 28. And the application is to construct a vertical enlargement and establish a master plan governing the future installation of storefront infill and signage. This was last presented at the public hearing of June 27th, 2023, and no action was taken at that time. The applicants will present their revisions to the proposal after we take a brief pause to move people in and out. Okay, we ready, Sarah?
Presentation.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay.
Oh,
Good morning, Commissioners. Erin Ruley, Higgins, Quaysbarth and Partners. We're glad to be back with you today to share the revised design for 277 Canal Street that you last saw in late June of this year. I'm joined by Morris Ajmi, and we are representing the LeBeau's family, United American Land, who are the owners and developers of this project. Abby, could we advance? Great. So just as a reminder, this is a proposal for a 9-story plus penthouse addition that restores the historic 1927 commercial building and then uses a shared DNA to allow for the addition above, and the building establishes a shared materiality, rhythm, and character that's all derived from the base building. At the public hearing, in June, we made a case for the appropriateness of such an addition, and you had specific direction on how the addition might be more harmonious and have a more meaningful relationship to both the building and its context. We've heard those comments, and we are back today with changes that we believe make for a better, more appropriate building, and we hope you agree. I'm going to take you through a bit of a summary, and then Morris is going to come and share with you the specifics of the design. We also have a refined signage master plan, and I'll share that at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Great. Thank you, Abby. So here we have just a summary of your comments that we heard at the hearing. We also have our specific design responses. But in general, what we're talking about today are the attic and cornice level. You thought there was a need for more depth and articulation and emphasis of the crown to give it a proper termination. At the penthouse and mechanical screen, you wanted the design to be differentiated from the base building and to simplify the design more in keeping with typical rooftop accretions in the district. In terms of materials, you asked that we simplify the palette and make more of a connection to the historic building itself in profiles, materials, and overall palette to unify the two parts. And then finally, in terms of signage and the storefront, you wanted something that related in terms of storefront infill that resonated more with the historic character of the building. And then also in terms of signage, something perhaps a bit more playful and reflective of the character of Canal Street. We've of course responded in words, but maybe the best place to see it is in elevation. So Abby, could we go to the next slide? Here we have the previous presentation on the left and the proposal before you today on the right. And Morris is going to take you through the specifics of the design, but I think the cumulative effect is a far more unified composition. We have, this is one that is more resonant with the historic building and also better relates to the historic streetscape through some of the interventions and bolstering of details in the design proposal. Next slide. And just as a reminder, this is the model that we looked toward. The tall masonry buildings we see up and down Broadway within the historic district. Our proposal has a comparable composition of an expression and rhythm within the base, shaft, and capital of the buildings. And we think that the design revisions actually bring it much closer to this historic context. And I think with that, Morris is going to share with you the details.
Pointer work. Let's see.
I don't think we can.
No, okay. Oh, I was just going to see if the pointer could work. Good morning, Chair Carroll and Commissioners. Aaron gave a good summary of the comments and our response. I'll go into a little bit more detail. I think we simplified the materials and we were asked to look at drawing from the existing building, which we had already started to do in the previous presentation. But I think this really ties all of the elements of the existing building and the new proposed structure together. And I'll start at the top. The attic story was really enhanced with additional cornice and belt course detailing, which relates directly to the existing historic structure, which I'll show you some blow-ups of that. We simplified the materials at the penthouse, left the brick end walls, which you'll see as well. We changed the spandrel panels on the lower section. That wasn't called out, but I'll show you on one of the other drawings. The storefront and the signage was also changed and enhanced. Next slide, please. One more, please. So if we start here, this is a Canal Street elevation. You can see that the cornice was almost doubled in size. It went from about 3'10" to 6'7", I believe. That encompassed the handrail with further articulation, and it also extends 3 feet from the face of the building. Before it was about a foot. And the belt course below the attic story, or at the attic story, extends a foot, which was what the previous cornice extended. One thing I should have pointed out is that there's an existing arched opening with a lattice pattern, the diamond pattern that you see in the tympanum on Canal Street. We used that originally to inspire the sawtooth brick pattern, but that's extended to the terracotta pilasters at the attic story as well. And so that really ties all of those elements together. And also just want to note that the spandrel panels, which were sort of a channel, more industrial, now directly relate to the spandrel panels in brick, although in metal relate to the proportions and the size of the spandrel panels on the existing building in brick. Next slide, please. And so here, just more detail on the drawings. You can see the cornice extending 3 feet from the face of the building, and the previous was a foot, and also the overall height was just under 6'7". And then the belt course was we added 6 inches to that, and also increased the depth of that. Next slide. And so here from the corner, you can really see the effect of the overall attic. I think you see it on the elevation, specifically how it's really the appropriate size now for the entire ensemble of components and the termination for the building. Additionally, it helps to shield some of the visibility of the penthouse, obviously, depending on the position. And you see all the elements here, the nail head or diamond pattern on the terracotta pilasters at the attic story, as well as the sawtooth brick pattern below. Next slide, please. Here, just more dimensions. I don't think we need to go through those, but and then on the mechanical screen, we're asked to look at reducing, simplifying the materials, make it more in keeping with some of the rooftop accretions that you see in the district and the neighborhood in general, which we've done. I'll show you some of the detailing in the next slides. So here you can see the brick wall extends as many of the existing buildings in the district. We've also set back this corrugated metal panel, simplified some of the detailing on the top of the building as well, and the fenestration panel pattern is also simplified. And you see the end wall there extending up and the material change. I think this is also a good view just to see the effect of the attic story, the enhancement of the cornice and the belt course, as well as just the taller story there really helps terminate the building. And you'll see it in the next image. This is Canal Street looking west, and the next slide, please. And here looking south on Broadway, similar effect of the cornice, and you see the reduced presence of the penthouse there. Next, so this is a simplification of the details, eliminating the brick and the metal, and just replacing that with the corrugated aluminum panels. And we have all the materials and colors there as well. Next, please. Another view of the penthouse. Again, just simplifying the details there. Next, please. In terms of the materials, we were asked to look at the brick to tie it in to the existing brick pattern. We also did a mock-up on site. In the previously proposed material for the brick, it was more monochromatic. We've found a brick that has a little bit of a range, but we want that still to read as monolithic material so that the pattern of the brick and the detailing of the elements are more pronounced with the shadow. And that's the existing on the left. And then the next slide shows all the materials for the existing building on the left and the proposed on the right, which is the brick with a slight variation, the terracotta and the bronze toned aluminum with the lighter aluminum for the penthouse. Here's a mock-up. It was a little difficult to get a good shot of this, but the brick really drew on the colors of with the exception of the black, the range of reds that you see on the existing building. And we've updated the renderings to show that. Next. The storefront. We were asked to enhance the details and look at the bulkhead, and we've done that. We've changed the profiles of the storefront. We introduced a mesh louver to hide the louver behind that, and that again recalls that diamond pattern that you see in the lattice on the arched opening above. And we have a few slides, additional slides of the storefront. Aaron's going to talk about the signage, but we have the previously proposed storefront below with sort of the commercial louvers, now more articulated storefront, taller bulkhead, and the mesh used to shield the grills. Here's some of the dimensions showing the less generic and more nuanced profiles for the storefront. Again, as a render showing the effect of those changes. Aaron, do you want to talk about the signage? Next, please. Yeah, thank you.
So as I mentioned, when we first presented the project to you in June, we had a sort of rather typical or standard storefront signage program, and your comments were that you wanted something that was more reflective of the context, and so we have worked hard to try to land on something, it's very hard to codify variety. And so we'll run through this. But just to give you a bit of context, here we are at Broadway and Canal Street in the 1830s. So there is a long history of signage, but more importantly, the active street life at this corner, which persists today and is really the rationale for why there was so much signage on this location and on the building specifically. And so we see that, and it's a sort of layered approach, both at the storefront and at the building scale. And that happens to sort of advertise to the pedestrian level, but also the vehicular level. As we know, Canal Street is a major interborough interstate thoroughfare. So we get lots of traffic, we get lots of pedestrian traffic, and we'll see some of that in this context. So next slide. Here are just a few buildings along Canal Street to give you a sense. This is, of course, before any signage is regulated. There's no zoning, there's no landmarks, obviously, and there's little regard to the actual underlying building. The buildings were the signs themselves, projecting to project signage in the distance and also at the street level. Next slide. At the building itself, we have of course, the theater that existed there historically. So the marquee and the attendant signage, the theater signage that was a tall vertical sign on the east end of the building. And then at the storefronts, we see signage at the storefront, within the transom, at the sign band above, painted signage in the windows, and then in the spandrel between the second and third floor. So again, picking up on all of those the view shed from the building, and how one might perceive the building in the context of a very busy intersection. Next slide. Most of you might remember Pearl River Mart was located here for almost 20 years. So this is sort of the more recent past, just prior to designation. So I think Pearl River was there until 2003 or so. And you can see how that signage evolves over time. It's contemporary signage for the time, but very much in keeping with what we had seen in those earlier iterations. Next slide. Oh, and this is also a good place to sort of observe the active street life. This is, if not equal to, it's more crowded now. So there's lots of vehicular traffic, the subway entry, and then, the densest of pedestrian traffic. Next slide. And then just to give you a sense of the nighttime view, how one experiences this corner of Canal Street in the evening, with the buildings lit and the vehicular lights, and what you're competing with in terms of signage at the building. Next slide. So here at the top is our previous presentation and what we had previously proposed in terms of signage. And at the bottom is a sort of conjectural view of the options that might be available under this signage master plan. As I mentioned, it's very hard to define irregularity, and we've worked very hard to try to create a flexible perspective for tenants, but also recognizing the breakdown of and scale and density that you experience along Canal Street. Next slide. So starting here, we have 4 types of signage for the retail spaces, and then 2 building-wide signage locations for the residential entry and the overall building branding. We've looked at this in 2 different configurations, one with 2 larger scale tenants, and then the possibility for breaking it down into 4 smaller retail establishments. Next slide. So first, starting with dimensional signage, this provides sort of 3 options within the dimensional signage category. They are all attached at the head of the storefront. So there is a bracket that extends at the head of the storefront below the terracotta. And on the left, we see a proposal for illuminated signage, internally illuminated. There's a 4-foot zone of signage, which allows for the ability to mount the signage at any location from that bracket. So you can move the signage up or down. It's not a fixed or static location across the storefront bays. The maximum signage height is 3 feet within that 4-foot span. And the second option is halo lit signage, which we see the Everlane signage is an example of halo lit. You need something to reflect off of here. So in the case of halo lit signage, it would be mounted at the bracket and reflect off of the terracotta. And as a result, because of the existing architecture, and you would be projecting in front of the flat frieze of the cornice there, that would be limited to 2 feet. In the case of an uplit sign or externally illuminated or non-illuminated signage, you again go back to that 4-foot zone and you have the ability to locate up or down within the rhythm of that bay. 2 examples on the bottom left. One provides for a signage panel that extends to the full height of the 36 inches that's allowable. And then that would then require slightly smaller letters to fit within that signage band. In the case of internally illuminated signage, only the letters and logos would be illuminated, not the background field. So the flat panel cannot be illuminated under this master plan. And then just a more typical on the right, dimensional letter illuminated that would max out at 36 inches. Next slide. Ground floor bracket signs. These largely follow the staff rules for bracket signs, except in their number and location. So here we have the maximum size for a bracket sign would be 2 by 2 because of the limitations on the projection within Soho and the required height above the sidewalk. So you have a 2 by 2 bracket sign, all fixed to new material, not the historic fabric. It gives you the ability to have a bracket sign in each bay, and it can be attached at any mullion or rail or style in the transom. I would also note that in the previous category of dimensional signage, that's available to any bay in the building, as is this one, not just the bays where there is an entryway. Next slide. Window decals, these follow the staff level allowance for 20% area of decal. So the vinyl decal, the yellow graphic that you see, Star Wars, the sock store, is a good example of what's allowable under staff level rules for vinyl decals. We have increased the allowance to provide for acrylic or metal dimensional letters. Those are limited to a 1/4 inch in thickness. This is a signage type we've been seeing a lot recently. The new staff rules allow it in transoms, but we've provided for this on the main display window. So the top image and the bottom right, the UGG image, are examples of that kind of signage where it's not a vinyl decal, it's a metal or acrylic with some minimal amount of projection. Next slide. Interior storefront signage. This is illuminated or non-illuminated within any range behind the window. And that is would comply with zoning, which allows for up to 8 square feet per establishment and up to 3 signs maximum. And in addition to that, are LED screens. The LED screens follow the new staff rules for they can occupy up to 50% of the glazing area. They need to be set back a minimum of 18 inches, and they can't occupy more than 75% of the width of the window. Next slide. And then just for the residential entry marquee, dimensional letters atop the existing marquee that's being reclad as part of the project. Of course, it was a theater. There's major signage on the historic marquee. We don't need that much signage, but we do need some amount of presence. And this allows a 4-foot height, but it could incorporate a logo or 2 lines depending upon the branding of the building. Next slide. and the historic building signage. So the existing building has the Old Harsh building in metal letters attached to the frieze at the parapet, and the proposal may in the future include modifying that, replacing it to match the existing letters in size, and consistent with what the commission has approved elsewhere in rebranding of historic buildings. Next slide. Oh, good. We're done with signage. So we'll step back and just take a look at the building in context. I think, these are the comparative elevations, which we've seen a few times already and gone through in detail. Next slide. Here is the Broadway elevation. So all of those changes are consistent all the way around the building. Next slide. And then the comparative shot from looking northeast. And here we can see all of the changes in context. And next slide. Now we're going to just take a walk around to see it in the overall district context. So looking west along Canal Street, you can see the reduction in the profile, the streamlining of the profile of the stair bulkhead. The material change of the penthouse allows it to recede behind the sort of typical bulkhead expression that we see in the sidewall. And you can also hear, I think Morris mentioned this, but this is where you start to really perceive the depth and articulation of the crown of the building, and feel how much more resonant it is with the depth of the historic facades. Next slide. This one, this is my favorite one. This here, so the simple change of the material change of the penthouse is so impactful here because you get the proper termination to the building. Here you see that sort of the increase in the cornice height and profile gives that really caps the building, and then allows the penthouse to recede in the distance. And again, all the depth and articulation on the facades that you see as you're looking at the oblique. Next slide. Similarly, looking down Broadway, the projection of the bulkhead. This is a great shot because it gives you that context along Broadway of all of the bulkheads expressed on the left side of the image, and how ours fits into that. And again, the profile of the bulkhead extension and the penthouse receding in the distance. Next slide. And this is it. With a concept of the potential signage is also included in this, just to give you a sense of what might be possible there. But I think with that, we'll take whatever questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Questions, commissioners? All right. I'm not seeing, yes, Vice Chair Bland.
Unless I've gotten amnesia, I don't think I was here for the.
You were not here.
Okay, good, sure. Thank you. Very, very reassuring. My question is a very vague, broad one, and it's directed to Morris. But I noticed that it was also in the directive from the commission back to you at the end of the first one. Something about the whimsy, or I've forgotten the word, on Canal. This building is so un-Morris-like in that it doesn't bring us what you've accustomed us to expect from you, which is a level of whimsy or something that takes it away from the almost generic quality. Am I missing something in the details that you're going to surprise us with, or is this as generic as it looks?
No, I don't think it's as generic as it looks. But I think the whimsy is in the surprise that it's the appropriate building for the site. But, and I always say that we never copy or mimic the context, but we look at the context for inspiration. And I think we've done that here.
Absolutely.
In Tribeca at the Sterling Mason 71 Late Street, we actually copied the building in a different material. And I think that lent it a sort of special quality. But here, I think all of the detailing of the brick, the detailing of the terracotta, and I really think it's a slightly different approach, just in terms of really knitting this new structure in. And we've done obviously projects where we've accentuated the difference between the modern or the addition and the existing fabric. Here we felt like it was appropriate really to make that one statement. It was a very unique building to start with, the existing building in the district, and Aaron had made a very strong case for that at the previous hearing. But I'm very happy with the overall resolution, the integration of all of those components to make a really strong new building that doesn't feel, it just feels natural, doesn't feel forced. So I would say, I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised, but there's a lot of attention to the details that I think will make it special.
Fair enough.
And I think, you know, it's right for the site.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any other questions? It's Commissioner Jefferson, followed by Commissioner Chu.
Oh, I think it's a handsome building. I think the color is probably the dominant element, but I have a couple of questions. One is the cornice. And on page 4, you show a really dramatic cornice of an existing. Right, the right-hand side, I mean, and the middle one, these are dramatic cornice. Your cornice increased by 3 feet. From the
It projects 3 feet, yeah.
How, do you know how much this one sticks out?
If I had to guess, I would say probably 4.5 or 5 feet.
Okay.
I think 3 feet was the maximum that we're allowed by code.
I call, okay.
And one of the things that we tried to do was, I'd like to say successfully did, was to tie the cornice and the whole attic story together so that it appeared to have a stronger presence at the top of the building. And I think, as Aaron pointed out, you really see it in the streetscape, that cornice and that attic sort of
Great. So
put an exclamation point at the top of the building.
my second question has to do with the signage. You have 6 types of signs.
Okay.
So you're creating a higher.
I'm running away from this. I'm let Aaron answer the side.
You have 6 signs, kind of defining a hierarchy of signs that you're going to use. Why do you need so many? But I mean, functionally, you know, you have storefronts X, Y, and Z, but you have 6 design criteria.
I think the goal was to have variety. Not every retailer is going to want. Well, the 6 types, two are for the residential use. So I think for the retail use, there's 4 different signage types. Staff usually allows for 3 under staff rules. We thought this is a very special place that can stand a little more cacophony, perhaps, or and maybe warrants it because it's so distracting. The streetscape is incredibly distracting. I wish we could take a video and just share with you what it's like to stand on this corner, but to just be able to center yourself and find something. We thought that giving a broad range, a broad palette was the best approach. And then retailers will choose. I mean, some are minimalist, some aren't going to opt for more than 1 or 2 signage types. And I'm certain in cases they might opt for all 4. But
well, thank you very much.
Flexibility.
Thank you. Commissioner Chu.
Yeah, I was just looking at the rendering comparison from the previous to the proposed, and maybe I missed this, but the color of the brick is significantly different in your renderings, and I'm just trying to understand what, even on the existing building.
Yeah, I think we try to more accurately reflect the colors of the materials. And I think that here it's coming up a little bit more saturated than when we actually did it. So
it's not that you're changing the brick on the existing facade.
We're just cleaning the brick and repointing. We're not changing it. And it's reading a little redder than it is.
At the same time, the one on the left reads a little too pale.
Right, exactly. Yeah. On this screen, it's actually closer to the way it looks, but I think here it's reading a little.
Maybe we could flip to the sample to show that there's the clean brick detail.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did you clean a brick to look?
We did. So,
and that matches the sample on the table down there? The clean brick?
This brick,
That's the proposed brick
Right.
and there's a photograph. I think did it get past? Was it next slide, right? Yeah. And here, so we cleaned that section of brick on the right where the medallion is. And this also is reading a little bit more saturated.
And it looks like there are grays in that blend too.
In the existing building? Yeah. And so we consciously didn't include the grays because we wanted to have that contrast, but we did draw on the range of reds in the base in the existing building. And this is, I would say, our intention. I think there needs to be a little bit more studying of the actual brick selection. And
Can I
something we
just
would
ask
do.
the design intent? I think I agree with Commissioner Jefferson's comment is that ultimately you've designed a very handsome, detailed facade. And it is a good fabric building. I think it's a handsome fabric building. Is that the impact really will be the addition over the existing?
Yes.
And from here, it looks like your intent is to make the addition feel more monolithic. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And that's the change in mortar makes it more monolithic and less of a pattern.
Right. And the goal really was to allow the patterns of the brick that you see on the pilasters to read. And we felt like if you had that a greater range, that would sort of interrupt the reading of that the sawtooth
textured
brick
facade and not the flat.
Right. And we just finished a project on Grand and Mulberry, which is not in the historic district, but it's Little Italy Special District. And we use a similar approach, and you really can read the pattern of and the texture on the bricks that we use there.
Can you go back to a slide that shows the whole facade? Because the existing picture on the right really shows us what that brick on the existing building looks like, and rendering is very hard to ever. And I think ultimately it's all about the right color balance here.
Yes.
Picking the right color brick.
Yes.
Okay.
Agreed.
Yeah. Because you're not matching it.
No, but we're trying to match the range of reds in the existing building without the to minimize that sort of range actually. Hop in.
Oh, because we went out in the field, staff joined us for a site visit to look at the brick. The red brick in the mock-up is actually a very good match to the red in the existing palette of the building. It's almost dead on. And the gray brick you were noticing, that's actually a burnished brick. So it's so it's really the mortar color that's creating that continuity and it's also the intent for having that monolithic approach. So we think that the brick color is spot on, and really there might be some variation in how we treat the mortar to try to make sure that there's that the relationship is there's a happy marriage there between the old and the new.
And what is the mortar style? What is your mortar profile? Is it weatherstruck? Is it recessed?
The current one is not, but when we were on site, we were talking about whether or not it wants to be a more of a tooled detail.
Do you want the shadow?
I think the shadow would help actually.
So.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last question is, and then again about the signage. Essentially, what you're proposing is expanding the possibilities of a tenant to put signage above and beyond the staff approval.
Yeah,
That's correct.
Standards.
I think we were asked to be more exuberant with the signage at the last.
That was
okay. Yeah. And that was.
all right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. And just actually, Commissioner Chapin has had her hand up, although it's down now. Commissioner Chapin, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was about the mortar, and the question was addressed in the conversation with Commissioner Chu.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Master.
Yes, I noticed that you switched, you changed the material of the penthouse from the brick to, I guess, an aluminum. Can you describe your rationale for doing so?
On the penthouse itself? Yeah, again, as Aaron pointed out, by changing the material, it allowed that attic story to be more pronounced, and less blending into the overall composition. Also, we've seen on previous projects, if we use a light to medium gray, it sort of recedes into the sky. And so we felt that that was more appropriate way to enhance the overall street wall and also to allow that to step back a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Commissioner Holford Smith.
The side walls appear to be the same brick as the front facades. Did you consider doing, like, would it be considered a common brick, which was typical of buildings, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. So, yeah.
And then for the signage.
I mean, or we could use the same brick and use a contrasting mortar. Might make it, might make it tied in, but also allow it to recede. Sorry.
And then the signage, I know that we asked for more exuberance, but is there a way to sort of control how much signage will eventually be? Like if every tenant wants all four types, is there some way to limit?
I guess we could
percentage of
put some kind of limitation to the amount of.
We could, of course, limit it, but I sort of question whether it's necessary in this context. It's not. If it were somewhere else, I would say differently. But I really feel like when you experience the place and try to understand sort of how retail works along Canal Street, that there really can't be too. I mean, yes, there could be too much, but I don't think it's within this range of options that it's too much. But there could be limitations to it.
Right, Commissioner Ginsburg.
The signage on Canal Street.
That's part of it, but and any bigger isn't enough, but doesn't the zoning also limit the amount of signage? So really
it does, and all this fits within zoning, but you know, as we saw in the historic context images, there was a great variety of signage historically, and it was at varying levels. Those are not possible anymore. So you really are just concentrated at the cornice line and below. And so it takes away some of the variation that one might hope for, but also obviously respects the building in a sort of fundamental way.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Goldblum.
So my question is kind of about intent, design intent. You've got a kind of a very traditional 1920s kind of building on the base, or your building on top. It's not like the Samsung building where you're trying to make a striking contrast. It's not a glass box where you're trying to say this is old, this is new. It's very continuous in the plane, in the architectural language, more or less, in the fenestration proportions. So the big move seems to have been the change of the grout, which will make it more monolithic, and the kind of reining in of the palette to be not, with a lighter contrasting bands, but with almost matching or very tightly. So what's the design intent with that? Is it to suggest that from a distance, we're really looking at a building that's designed in a historic style from stem to stern, and that's one effort? Is it really supposed to articulate itself as a kind of a modern addition? What's your thinking on that?
I think somewhere in between. So I think it is the use of the monolithic brick treatment with the matching mortar. I think the detailing is pared back, but has nods to what's happening at the existing building. But I think we're recreating an entire sort of composition that does relate to the existing tall corner buildings that you see along Broadway and throughout Soho. So I think it's sort of walking a line between, and I think we could have made a much louder statement, but I think that this is appropriate given the position and the relationship to the other buildings in the district.
So when you look at this building in real life, do you think that Johnson is going to really feel separate from the bottom, or do you feel it's going to be kind of seen as the same?
I think it's I think at first glance, I think it's going to look like a composed building that could perhaps have been built at one time. But I think as you look at it, the more nuanced detailing and relationships will present themselves.
Okay.
And that's why I guess I said, I think it's doing both.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Commissioner Jefferson.
I mean, as I said before, it's a very handsome building. But the historical component of it is just that little quadrant, 6 bays, and that corner is the historical component, right?
Yeah.
And somehow, conceptually, it's a handsome building. It's fine. I was suggesting that perhaps that historical component could be broader, that it could be extended across the base. So you would have a cornice that's beautiful, a middle that's handsome, and then the base would have a different conceptual framework. But what you have done here is very beautiful. It's fine.
Thank you. I just to maybe remind everybody, when we looked at this the first time, we looked at a series of other not series. We looked at 2 examples, both on Broadway, that were expanded, vertical additions. We also looked at a number, I think it was 6, other buildings for the overall organization of the fenestration and the facade. And so we emulated those organizations to create this composition. We also looked at how there was a sub base which reads just at the 4th floor, just above the existing building, and then gets recalled in the attic story as well, using the profiles or expanded profile based on the existing building belt courses. So it's a hybrid, and next time maybe it'll be more exuberant.
I just have one last.
Okay, Commissioner Chu.
Just so that I understand the only unusual bay is the one on the right.
Yes.
And is that still function as a building main entry?
Yes, it is.
Does.
Yes, and there was a marquee for the theater there, which is still, some of it is still there. We're going to reclad that
With the signage shown in the slide.
and that'll be the entrance to the residential portion of the building above.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I think we can move to our discussion.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation. So as has been noted, the last time we saw this, there was a lot of support for this general approach. The idea of vertically expanding an existing building, because this building is an anomaly within the existing building is an anomaly within the historic district. And the notion of doing it at the street wall and in complementary materials that were based on the historic precedents applicants just discussed now and showed us last time, that ultimately led to this composition. So there was a lot of support generally for this approach and this design. We unanimously supported the height at this corner in this historic district. There was discussion on the penthouse and how to reduce its presence, and it was sort of a 2-part thing. There were comments about simplifying the materials of the penthouse and then increasing the strength and projection of the cornice and attic level of the building to read as the dominant feature. There were also some comments about articulation and of the facade, and the commission, some of the commissioners asked for sort of more texture and depth in those details. And there were also some thoughts about the colors of the brick and terracotta. And with respect to the signage, I think that everybody recognized how Canal Street has a lot of signage. And 5 of the 7 commissioners present explicitly said that you could be more bold on Canal Street, but that we needed more context to really understand it. if the context supported it, but then that you could be more bold on Canal Street. I think two of the commissioners were still a little bit reluctant about how bold you could go, and not detract from the design of the building itself. So that's where we were. I'm going to start with the commissioners who were present last time. So Commissioner Ginsburg, I think last time you were largely supportive of the project as it was presented then. I think you were comfortable with signage on Canal. You did ask them to rethink the materials at the penthouse.
And I think the change in the penthouse, it really helps the building, and I'm supportive of it. And I don't know how you legislate chaos, which is what you'd like, as far as I'm concerned, on Canal Street, but having more variation, I think, in the signage is fine.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, and Commissioner Goldblum, you also were comfortable with the height of the building, but asked that they look at increasing the height and depth of the cornice to reduce the presence of the penthouse, and asked for more texture and deeper details. You also had questions about the color of the brick and the terracotta, and I think also, largely relied on the context of Canal Street for your approach on the signage.
Yeah, I'm fine with the signage as presented. I think it's contextually appropriate. I think that the change to the cornice profiles is a big improvement. I share Fred's comment about the reserve of the building, but that's certainly not a comment on appropriateness, I don't think. What I do worry about, if you go back to page 21, that the original mock-up is, as Morris said, he's on the line between something that is overtly intending to contrast and something that is overtly intending to extend, right? The language of the building below it. And I guess I'm more of an absolutist than he is, but that's his right, and he's not wrong to be shooting for that target. I worry very much that this particular palette is rather different from the renderings, in that the new palette, because of the mortar, not because of the brick color, I don't think, but because of the mortar and because of the trim colors, is going to feel like the intention was to do an additive building, right? Where it's all kind of, the moldings are traditional, everything lines up, the fenestration. It just, as a mass and as a bulk and as a squinted design, as Morris said, from a distance, it really does feel like a single composition. I just worry that when you get closer, it won't start to have the subtleties that he speaks about, but will feel like they swung and they missed on a match. That doesn't make me feel that it's inappropriate. I'm willing to give it a shot. It's a big risk, but the safe solution would have been to just make the terracotta match the terracotta below, and to kind of seek to really blend it do something with the grout that was more in line with the grout below. 'Cause I think when you look at the building from even a reasonable distance, you're going to really see the variation in the grout considerably. And it's going to kind of change the overall feel of the building. I'm concerned about it, but I would still view it as appropriate. I hope it works out.
Okay, and we can certainly have them continue to think about the mortar choice in the field with the staff.
I think about this, the Puck building, where when I first saw the parapet, when it was put up, it just looked like such a glaringly mistaken brick choice. And I think that they wound up modifying it or something, but it's the kind of, it's so subtle that you don't want it to look like a mistake. You want it to look like it was intentional. So I don't know. I think it's an appropriate scheme and very,
Okay.
very subtly done. I just worry about the colors.
All right. And I think
Ann's idea about the party wall is a great idea, and they might even look to do. I mean, I was looking up and down the street. The bigger buildings do seem to have some lot line windows, and this if anything would be the poster child, so to speak, for a side signage. I think they do tend to loom a little bit, those walls.
I saw Albert's eyes go, All right, Commissioner Holford Smith, I think you also had very much the same comments, really talked about the attic floor being stronger and being a little more creative on the signage. You suggested the storefronts have stronger transoms and bulkheads, which they've incorporated. So how are your thoughts now?
I think all the changes are very positive. I think it's a much improved building. It was nice before, but I think it's much better now. I am persuaded by the signage that I think it'll self-regulate. I do share some of Michael's concern about the color of the brick and the monolithic aspect of it. So I would just encourage them to keep looking at the brick and the mortar and maybe do some more mock-ups, because, you know, when you look at the original building, it goes a little more black and sort of dark maroon versus the sort of terracotta red of the brick. And it just, as Michael was saying, you don't want to make it look like a miss. So, and then again, you know, I should either a common brick or using the same brick with a light mortar for the back facades, I think would be more appropriate.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. And Commissioner Jefferson, I think you also were comfortable with the height. You specifically talked about simplifying the penthouse the last time.
I'm comfortable with all of it.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Master, you were largely supportive last time, including the signage on Canal Street. How are you feeling now?
So I like the proposed. I like the cornice. I like the red. I think it ties in much better than it did previously. I think the signage is fine. I think there's 3 types of signs allowed now, and we're just adding one more option. So I think it'll be fine. I also want to applaud the mesh louver that they're putting on the retail. I think that's a nice touch as well. So I think this is appropriate. I would say that in terms of the matching of the brick and the mortar that Michael raised, I think they can work with staff to refine that.
Great, thank you. All right, Commissioner Chu, similar comments. I think you also had thoughts about the variety of materials and colors on the facade the last time, and also the ask to see more depth in profiles and some more heft to the storefronts. And I think with respect to the signage, you thought it could be playful, but you didn't want it to go so far that it detracted from the building.
Yeah, so I think that much of the current proposals are improvements. I think it is a very handsome design. I think the fact that you documented it well and clearly helped us all. That's why you got so many questions and comments. I do, you know, this is not something that we really judge based on, but I do wish you had tried something above the entry to make maybe a slight recess in that bay. But I think that as it is, it's appropriate, the design that you have. The mortar color and the brick color, of course, we've talked about at length. We all share just the concern that the ultimate balance is going to be there. I tend to agree with you on using the same to give it a monolithic approach, only because I do see the instinct to want to make the addition different than the existing. And hence not repeating the light bands horizontally up at the top portion of the building. But I do think, and I do agree with you, that it will give it more of a plastic textured feel if you don't call out the lines of the mortar so much. Hence your articulated brick and in your terracotta. The terracotta, I am assuming, I don't know if there's a sample that it's glazed. I'm just, when I look at it at the end of the matte. Okay, good. Okay, so that doesn't call itself too different than the brick, which will be very matte. Yeah, I think that staff would work with you on looking at the final color selection. That's my ultimately feeling about the big picture here. I think the cornice is great, much improved. It needed the weight and the projection and the shadow lines. Overall, I can see a lot more texture above from the previous, which is a huge improvement. And lastly, I still feel that the signage is aggressive. That's my personal outlier opinion, but I feel like you've come up with a facade that is quite handsome, and I just feel like the signage feels too much of a tack on, too much. And it doesn't feel like it respects the building you've designed. I would propose maybe limiting the options, is my comment there.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Lutfi, you also had a lot of support for the project, but did suggest simplifying materials, stronger cornice, simplifying the penthouse, and I think you felt the sign should be more restrained.
Yeah. Could we just go back to the other view of the building at the intersection?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Lutfi, could you speak into your mic?
I just wanted to go back to the prior view where we
This
were
one
at.
here?
No, it was really at it's full intersect. That's it. Thank you. Because I want to just emphasize something that I talked about a little bit last time again, and that is that, I mean, I was very supportive of the project then, and I continue to be. But the one I want to first address the fact that I really think that this is a very important nexus, as we discussed the last time, and it's important that the building here anchors this intersection, and I think it has very successfully done that in a way that also enables it to embrace the height that it has. And I think it also marries from an architectural standpoint, and not only what's going on Canal, but also what's coming, south. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate so as part of that, the desire to look at what was pre-existing. And I'm going to say, I don't want to use the word build upon it literally and figuratively, without really having it look like I don't think it's going to look like an add-on, because I believe that when you're going to see that variation in the brick at the base, and you're going to understand the age of that particular part of the building. And because of that, I really I accept and support this idea of having a more monolithic visual above it. And I think that works really well. And I am supportive of everyone's concern about the mortar, although I'm a little less concerned because I'm looking at the pallets here and it looks like it works to me, but it's never a bad idea. And you're very good at going back and looking and massaging. So why not do it? And I think the extra detail that you put in at the cornice, it gives it a little more heft. And also at the vertical banding in the attic with the diamond pattern is very nice. And, these just little touches horizontally that you brought out help. It's all refinement. And I think you do it well. I also like what's going on at the retail level in terms of the windows and the doors. and the flexibility that you're going to be able to give to tenants. Subway entrance works well. I do like that mesh at the top. I was not a big fan of having a cacophonous signage. I don't actually think it is, but I'm still not a big fan of it. And I'm not convinced that it's appropriate to the tenants who are going to be going here. And I can accept, the band course being a little more, distinctive, but I feel like within the glass retail space itself, it is going to need more order. And I would definitely recommend working with staff on that, because I don't think the retail that's going to go in here is like the retail that is further up Canal. And that's it. You did a great job.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair Bland. You were not here last time, but you've heard the discussion and seen the changes.
And thanks for the reminder. So this gives visible rooftop addition a new meaning, I think. We're really seeing it. And as you heard, I'm going to vote for the project. But let me just say that I'm philosophically opposed to this approach. But I don't think that my philosophy interferes with the fact that I can also rise above that sometimes and say, it's appropriate. It can be appropriate. But let me just explain a little bit more and very quickly what I think. I think the new and the old need to be separated much more clearly and visibly. I think something that was built, 80, 100 years, whatever it is ago, just shouldn't be replicated, even when we're building one building. I think some of the most exciting architecture that is possible these days is that combination of new old, the most exciting for me, at least. And I think Norman Foster, of course, did it brilliantly at Hearst. He did it brilliantly in a building that we approved here, right as I joined the commission 15 years ago, at the Sotheby's Park Burnett Gallery on Madison and 75th. From my mind, unfortunately not built, brilliant. Again, a visible rooftop addition, so to speak, really one new building built of two parts. So that's what I would have seen. And I have confidence enough in this architect, and he knows that I think that he will eke out the details somehow or other that will still pass muster with what we pass here today, but will make the building just more interesting, at least visually up close. So I've said what I've said, and I'll vote for the building.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Chapin, you were also not present at the last public hearing, the first public hearing last meeting.
Well, I agree that the changes the applicant has made are very positive in general. I think the expanded cornice, the changes to the attic level are both very good, and the rooftop penthouse changes in terms of simplifying and making it look more like typical rooftop accretions and color all are very positive. I had some concern about the dark mortar, but I understand the intent to create a monolithic appearance or more monolithic appearance. And I think that's a positive also. I can support that, seeing what the intention is. I thought that Commissioner Holford Smith's suggestion about recessing the mortar was a good one to further kind of differentiate it. And I think that the changes to the storefront, the bulkhead and mesh both make it bring that closer to a typical storefront, which I think is appropriate. The signage issue, I'm a little concerned about solid signage bans that might obscure the historic building, which we do want to continue to preserve our appreciation of that. So I'd kind of like to see them not using that in the palette. That would limit the palette, I guess, to 3. So then we'd be back to a more traditional palette. And as far as the variation, though it's unusual, I could support having, a varied signage with, if they do still continue to use the solid signage band with maybe just limiting the number of choices to 3 within the palette, that might achieve at least some limitation of the signage. But as I said, my first choice would just be to not use the solid signage bands as part of the group. And I think the marquee is fine. So in general, I think it's extremely appropriate.
Okay, great. Thank you all. And thank you, commissioners, for your thoughtful questions and comments on this project. So I think where we are today is that we can make a motion to approve this project contingent upon the applicant continuing to work with the staff at looking at the brick and mortar samples in the field and exploring a contrasting mortar on the side facades. So Commissioner Ginsburg, would you like to make the motion?
Yes. Thank you. With regards to LPC 23-09-351-277 Canal Street, aka 277-289 Canal Street, and 418-422 Broadway, Soho, Cast Iron Historic District. A Renaissance Revival style theater, store, and loft building designed by David M. Oltarsh and built in 1927-1928. Application is to construct a vertical enlargement and establish a master plan governing the installation of storefront infill and signage. Excuse me here. I note that the building style, material, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. I also note that the building within the Soho Cast Iron District and its extension reflect shifting waves of development evolving from residential to entertainment, manufacturing and storage, utilitarian and support uses, and back to residential, and the districts experienced a period of stagnation and decay with little new construction occurring during the early to mid 1900s, at which time the buildings were constructed. Furthermore, I note that the buildings such as 525 and 565 Broadway were vertically extended in the late 1800s and early 1900s as transportation improvements were made to the surrounding areas, and that the additional stories were constructed in plane with the original building base and designed to be an integral part of the facade. Additionally, I note that the public meeting of December 12th, 2017, the commission approved a new 122-foot tall building at 301 Canal Street, aka 419 Broadway, which is located across the street from the subject property. Finally, I note that a thorough restoration of the historic building facade will be reviewed at staff level. I recommend approval with modification, finding that the existing 3-story building dating to the 1920s is not representative of the key period of significance of the historic district, primarily represented by its 19th century cast iron stores and loft buildings, that this simply designed building was originally built as a theater, a use that does not relate to the commercial manufacturing history of the district, and its height does not define its typology. Therefore, constructing a large vertical extension will not detract from the architectural style of the building or the special historic and architectural character of the Soho Cast Iron Historic District extension. That the historic precedent of the Soho Cast Iron District of vertical building extensions constructed in plane with the original building base and designed to be an integral part of the facade, that the Broadway and Canal Street are wider than other streets within the historic district and feature corner buildings which are often notably larger than the buildings found on the side streets, and that the existing building features a large lot area and longer street frontage than the typical lot in the district. Therefore, the taller height will fit well with the overall scale of the streetscape. That the composition of the vertical extension featuring the existing building as a base, a one-story transition delineated by a simple cornice, a seven-story middle shaft featuring tripartite window bays with bronze aluminum spandrel panels at each floor, and a one-story crown and cornice harmonizing with the design of the existing building and reflects the typical composition of other tall masonry buildings within the historic district, and that the existing building will remain legible. That in general, the material palette features aluminum windows and spandrel panels with an inset detailed dogtooth brick at masonry piers and matte and red terracotta at cornice and cladding at the top floor will complement the material of the existing building and will harmonize with the neighboring building and buildings found throughout the historic district while contributing to the building's contemporary design. That the aluminum window assembly featuring three single lights, fixed windows above a single light awning window aligned with bays that are separated by major vertical masonry piers further helps to emphasize the verticality of the facade and relate to the tripart configuration and window bays width of the existing building. That the north and east lot line facades featuring solid red brick cladding, control joints, and sloping rooftop stair bulkheads with brick cladding will be seen as secondary and subservient facades and are typical of large exposed secondary masonry walls found throughout the district. That the partially visible rooftop accretions are minimal in scale compared to the overall large building, therefore they will not overwhelm the building. That the homogeneous matte gray aluminum standing seam cladding used at the rooftop accretions will help to minimize their massing, will reflect the industrial nature of the historic district and will help them to recede from view against a sky backdrop. That the decorative urns at the pediment entrance at Canal Street will be retained and modified to engage with the vertical extension, thereby preserving these significant architectural features. That the demolition of the interior floor and lot line walls of the historic existing building is necessary to install a new steel frame structure to support the vertical extension and will be designed and built in compliance with the Department of Buildings regulations under the supervision of a licensed engineer to protect the facade and adjacent buildings. That the proposed replacement windows on the second and third floor of the existing building featuring tripartite aluminum assemblies with fixed and casement single light windows and transoms with a bronze finish will match the configuration of the original windows and will recall original vertical pivot operations while accounting for interior structural constraints and will help to unify the lower facade with the new tower above. That the removal of modern cladding, signage, storefront infill from the existing building will eliminate unsympathetic alterations that detract from the significant architectural features of the building and will restore the height and width of the historic storefront bays and placement of terracotta piers, thereby bringing the facade closer to its historic appearance. That the establishment of a master plan governing the future installation of storefront infills and signage will allow for flexibility while promoting consistency by defining infill configurations and type, location, size, material for signage at all facades. That the design and finish of the proposed aluminum storefront infill featuring tripartite display with paneled bulkheads and metal mesh transom and paired glass and aluminum doors, all with a bronze finish, will relate to the configuration of the other windows at the existing building and vertical extension, will help to unify the facade and will recall the configuration and proportions of typical historic infill in a contemporary manner. There is a historic precedent for large signs and variety of signs and illumination types at buildings along Canal Street, a highly commercial thoroughfare. Therefore, the presence of multiple large halo-lit, external illuminated and internally illuminated storefront signs will not detract from the streetscape view and reinforce the relationship of the building to the site. That replacing the two existing building identification signs, the Old Harsh building at the third floor will be limited to building identification only and will feature a pin-mounted metal lettering to record the historic signs. That the proposed redesign of the modified historic recessed subway entrance at the Broadway facade of the building base, featuring a granite water table and a clear display window along the northern wall at the recess, will activate the space, relate well to the storefront and materials at the street facing facade, and provide a more unified treatment of the base. That the installation of artwork at the eastern and southern facades of the recess will reflect the history and transition of artistic expression in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District and the extension, and that the placement of the marquee with signage at the Canal Street entrance recalls the historic movie theater marquee present in the 1920s, will retain the original facade tiebacks, and the bronze finish aluminum cladding will harmonize with the building material. However, I find that I recommend therefore using contrasting color mortar on the side facades, and that they work with the commission staff to refine the selection of brick and pointing mortar through on-site review.
Thank you. And Commissioner Holford Smith, would you second that motion?
I second it.
Thank you. And John, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Vice Chair Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chu.
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson. Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
Commissioner Master.
Aye.
10 in favor, none opposed. The motion passes.
All right, that's approved. Thank you. We'll move to the next item.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now move to our public hearing agenda, starting with public hearing item number 1, LPC 24-03209, an application for a certificate of appropriateness of the Borough of Staten Island, Block 582, Lot 12, 22 Marion Avenue in the St. Paul's Avenue, Stapleton Heights Historic District. This is a Greek Revival style freestanding house with later alterations built in the mid-19th century, and the application is to install hardy board siding.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, Commissioners. Abby Hurlbut, Preservation Staff. This application is for work at 22 Marion Avenue, which is located here on the west side of Marion Avenue between Zebra and Palmer Avenues in the St. Paul's Avenue, Stapleton Heights Historic District in Staten Island. So I'm going to briefly describe the proposal before handing it off to the homeowners to discuss in further detail. So the designation report describes this building as a Greek Revival style building house with later alterations that was actually moved to this site circa 1886 to 87 during the rapid growth of the district at that time. So it is believed that this Queen Anne style porch was likely added at that time that the house was moved, excuse me. So the proposal before you today is to install fiber cement board siding, also known as hardy board, on all facades over the existing wood siding and replace the wood trim with composite trim. So the proposal consists of installing plywood sheathing on top of the existing wood siding to remain, followed by an insulation wrap and any required flashing at the openings, and finally the hardy board lap siding. So as a result, the plane of the new siding will be proud of the existing siding by just shy of 1 inch. So the window casings and lintels are proposed to be the composite AZEC material, while the historic wood fascia and the brackets at the cornice at the top of the building, as well as the porch, will be just repaired and retained in their existing locations. So now the homeowners are here to take you through the existing conditions and discuss the proposal in further detail. So make sure you state your name for the record, Tyla. And as you may have noted, we're having some difficulties, so you'll have to just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Oh, okay. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Tyla Kachese. My husband Eric and I are here today to talk about our house on Marion Avenue in the Stapleton section, like Abby just told us a little bit about, on Staten Island. We bought the house in 2014. I was 9 months pregnant at the time. I grew up on Staten Island, about 2 miles away. I've lived here for most of my life. My husband's from Staten Island, the South Shore, which is kind of like New Jersey, but don't tell him that. The house was empty for about 10 years or so before we bought it. So it needed a lot of love. I don't know how to advance. Can I not do that? She'll do it. Okay. So we sort of jumped in, tackling what we could. This is when we moved in. It was peach or pink, I guess. Abby, you can go to the next one. A little overgrown, it was empty. The woman that lived there was kind of a gardener, but it was, needing a lot of love, needing some, getting the water away from the house, putting in some, like a French drain kind of thing we did, and cleaning things up, and then sort of starting our DIY projects, going to Home Depot, getting what we could, having a baby casually, painting and getting it ready to like be our house, and settling into the neighborhood. We've kind of loved it. I grew up, like I said, 2 miles away over by Snug Harbor in slightly different neighborhoods. So we were really excited to be sort of moving on up, I guess, into this really awesome historic neighborhood that we've grown to love. My kids go to school walking distance away. My husband works for the city. He could almost walk to work, but he doesn't. And so it kind of just began. We can go to the next one, the next slide. This is our first Christmas. So we started working on the outside and really sort of addressing some obvious water issues and things that we kept seeing with the siding. You can go to the next slide. We had applications submitted to paint and make some repairs in 2015, update the color, sand and stain our front porch. You can go to the next one, which we did a lot ourselves, which was fun. We put in an application and we're permitted for the new front door, which we kind of love. And we're surviving here. I had another baby in the meantime. And just kind of started dealing with interior issues and water issues. Abby, next slide. We kind of had a million different contractors come through in the past 9 years. Everybody has ideas for what to do. Everyone wants so much money. And we kind of were thinking, how do we do this? How do we maintain it? What do we do for the fixes? So Abby, next slide. We are dealing with a lot of different sides of different patches over the years, things that have been done well, things that haven't been done so well, lots of cracks and seaming. Next slide. So what we were kind of trying to address with the painting and the patching and repairing didn't really last as long as we had hoped. We were told we'd probably get 7 to 10 years out of painting the house. We needed to paint it within 5 years again. So, and everything is now, 15 to 20% more, which is kind of putting us in the spot where we need to have a more permanent fix. Next slide. So this is just a little bit of the things we're dealing with on the house. A lot of the wood is deteriorated, not all of it, some of it looks good, some of it needs help. There's tons of caulk and epoxy and everything on it that we could come up with and have contractors have come up with to help us kind of live in it where we don't have to make this massive change yet. So we've sort of been eking that out along the way. Next slide. We have been dealing with water infiltration that has been almost overwhelming. We don't know anybody on our block that gets water like we do. We speak to everybody. Anytime someone has a contractor on the street, we run and we get their info, and we have people come over. Next slide. And they, tell us, you have to do this, you have to do that, you need to do this. We get quotes that are just way out of our price point for what we could possibly afford to do. And so we've been thinking, okay, let's save up money. Let's get this done. Let's figure out how do we do it? The changes in our weather patterns have really not been our friend. And we're getting these storms, like, 10-year storms, 50-year storms, 10-year storms, maybe like once a year. We had terrible rains in July that caused a lot of deterioration on the inside. Next slide. The other way. Forward. Thank you. We've had some issues with the September past storm that made some of these boards so soggy and just dried out at the end that we can just pull them off with our hands. And the water coming in is 100 times worse than what it looks like on the outside. Next slide. So we're just sort of at the end of what we're able to figure out for patching and repairing. We've put several insurance claims on, and we're told by our agent that if we put in one more claim, we'll likely be dropped. So that's kind of causing a little bit of a panic for us going now into winter, wondering what this is going to be like, what we're going to do. So we have this water that comes in. Next slide. We've had the roof inspected 3 or 4 times. The water is not coming from the roof. It's actually coming in through the walls. So you can see the center picture. We have a full covered porch. This is above our front door. The water just finds a way, and it finds this low point and it just drips in. This slide all the way on the left, I've rebuilt, literally gone to Home Depot and found the little metal edge and figured out sanding and plastering and painting 4 times in 9 years. I don't even want to do it anymore. It just looks like that because I almost refuse. We get wood floor damage. We'll go away for a night or 2, and then there's a puddle on the floor, and that's what the wood floor looks like. And no one wants to come in and fix 4 boards. They want to do your whole floor. So unfortunately, we just kind of like leave it like this. Next slide. These are going to get kind of embarrassing, I think. More water just kind of finding its way, leaking from these strange little spots. It finds a low point. It bubbles all the plaster, the paint off, and then it comes in and it's all over the house. Next slide. It's embarrassing. This is sort of what we've come up with to keep it from coming out from the windows. So it's not actually leaking from the windows. It's coming from these low points that it finds, or small little cracks or seams in the wood that we just haven't been able to chase down. It comes over the windowsill. You could see here, it's dripping between the window and the actual frame of the window. This is the front of the house, my daughter's bedroom. We're just like chasing water around the house. We patch, we repair, we sand, we paint, we caulk something, we call someone else. They go up on a ladder, they do it. Next slide. And then the next storm, there's water somewhere else. This is the porch, which is amazing to me. We have a full covered porch, and the water finds a way to get in and rain inside the porch. And then eventually comes through that window and ends up inside our home. And we see it or we don't see it until it looks like that, or there's damage to the floor. We have like bags of old towels, and my kids run around and we put towels everywhere. And we've kind of become like these connoisseurs of water drip color, telling you if it's a light colored water, it probably came from right there. This one came from far away, probably the 3rd floor, because it's so gross. It's not funny, but it's our life, right? This is what we're dealing with. Next slide. So we've, this is our method for trying to not create more damage to our wood floors. I rip up pieces of dish towel and use a butter knife and shove them in the cracks so that the water doesn't come across the whole floor, and we're not throwing away furniture or sending rugs out to be cleaned. this is the front of the house, which we seem to get a lot of the brunt of this rain and the storms on the I guess, east side of the house, which would be the front, and then the north, which is the right side of the house. I guess that's just where we are on the map. That's where all this rain and wind comes, and it just pummels us. Next slide. So through this process and through our September repairs, which were pretty disastrous inside the house, we had to replace a bunch of sheetrock. We had boards that we could just pull off on our own. We met a great contractor who's really been kind of like an angel to us. He understands our budget constraints. He knows where we need to be, and he's really trying to help us figure out how to get there. We uncovered some really upsetting issues or problems here when we were doing these last repairs, when we were putting sheetrock on the inside and pulling these boards off, that we've known or realize now that there's no plywood on the house and there's hardly any insulation left. Next slide. I do have a picture of it somewhere. So this is our back repairs that we had to do for recent water leaks. The waterproof coating, I guess, or the weather wrap that's hardy that we just have up as a temp. And then the other side of the house, left side of the house, that is, I didn't label those, sorry. Next slide. This is the inside where we had to take off sheetrock and put up more. And this is our insulation, which explains why it costs us $800 a month in the winter to heat our house. And it's amazing to me. I was kind of dumb as to what I was looking at. I didn't realize that is my siding right there. And I guess this really explains why the water just finds its way. You know, it's amazing in the worst way, I guess. Next slide. So working with this contractor. Oh yeah. So this is pretty cool. So, well, not cool, but we pulled a board off and stuck a phone in there, and this is the front of the house too. So that's our plaster and lath up on the 3rd floor, and no insulation or whatever that is to be found. And then the outside of the house, the siding right there. Next slide. So the contractor has told us, listen, I know you love the house. I know you love the wood. I know in an ideal world, this is what you want to do. We've sort of just resigned ourselves to the fact that, like, we almost can't afford to take the risk. We bought the house because we love the neighborhood and we love the look of it. And we don't want to change that as best as we can. We want to keep it looking almost like exactly like what it does. But the maintenance costs for wood are just more than we can bear. And the risk is now much more frightening that we can't get a warranty on the wood like we can get with something like a hardy board product. We presented this to Community Board 1 on Staten Island. They had no objections. They knew the house. They said they knew the street. They don't want us to like pack up and leave. They want us to fix it and to stay. And that's what we want too. They did suggest we have an architect come and look. So we kind of hustled to have someone come out. He did as well. He examined, he looked at the situation with the plywood. And his letter is attached at the end, but he also kind of gave his assessment as well that we should probably not do wood just because of the maintenance and the level of cost. And it isn't going to address the issue that the house would then not be insulated and we still have no plywood. So the proposal and the idea here, which Abby came out and spoke with our contractor and we kind of looked through. Abby, you can go to the next slide. I'm sorry. This is the trim. I don't know why that picture's not popping up, but it should be there. It's just the AZEC trim and showing you how it's all attached, but whatever. So this is sort of the idea here, or what our plan and proposal would be that instead of taking the wood off, which we don't really want to do, I don't want to see it in a dumpster. We're going to kind of repurpose it as our insulating layer. And the plywood, half-inch plywood is going to be attached to the studs through the siding. And then house gets the weatherproof house wrap on top. And then the boards go on top of that 5/16 of an inch. We're adding 13/16, just under or just over, I guess, 3/4 of an inch of thickness to the house. Yeah, next slide. So we did some measuring for the boards themselves. You don't have to go back, but the hardy board comes in all different widths. So most of ours are the 7-inch exposure that we think would look really beautiful and would really look traditional for what it is. Some of our boards are 4. We could kind of mix and match them to sort of achieve that look. We can, Abby, go forward, sorry. You can see that this is the porch. This is our current window trims too. The other slide that's not popping up had some trim. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so if you go back one, this is side of the house, in front of the house, windows. The trims are a little bit different, but most of them look like this window here with that flat board and that teeny little trim on top. Most of our window sills are rotted and have been patched up and are not even wood anymore. They're just kind of like that, I don't know what it's called, like that pink stuff that comes out of the container and then turns white when it's dry, and then repainted to kind of shaped and painted. So we'd have to replace all of these with their hardy trim so that we would get their 30-year warranty, which is kind of the peace of mind that we sort of need to, really be willing to invest in the home and want to stay. We don't want to do something that's going to look great for 5 years or 10 years. We want to do something that's going to look great for our lifetime, Next slide. This is the trim packages that we were presented with. We kind of like number 6. We like number 4. If we could turn number 4 upside down, which they said we can do. I don't know why. Maybe ours were installed upside down all the time. I don't know, but you can see ours do kind of look like that more than any of the fancier ones that are more decorative. They're more plain and basic. Abby, next slide. These are some homes we kind of drove around and saw just to sort of see who has a house that looks like ours, who has this trim, who has these packages that did the flat lap siding as well in hardy. So we're liking these. We love that they kind of kept their flat fascia board the same, which we're not going to touch either. You can go to the next slide. The porch we've already done a bunch of work on, trying to keep our contractor not taking another job and really keep him busy, and please stay. And we promise we'll figure this out. We had his whole team sand the whole porch, refinish anything that needed to be, rebuild any chips and dents, and paint everything again. So the porch really does look great and we're happy with it. Next slide. I think you might be able to see. Oh, can you go back? I feel like we're missing one. So there's another slide in here, I swear, to show you the whole front of the house, just so you can see the corbels and the board at the top, which would remain wood as is. It's just sanded and repainted, but we're not going to remove any of that. Abby, can you maybe go back to the beginning where you could see the whole house? So you guys,
I think we have a sense of the whole house.
You know,
Let's move forward.
I should not sound crazy, but
We'll go back.
stay there. It's fine. You can stay there. You can go to the next one, and I'll wrap it up. So this is sort of the homes in our neighborhood, surrounding homes. There's some wood mixed in, of course. There's stucco. There's the asphalt or asbestos siding. There's tons and tons of vinyl siding. Next slide. We think that the hardy board would work really well. We are over 23 feet back from the street, so I don't think it's going to be like this glaringly horrible thing that, people are going to freak out about, but I guess you never know. So next slide. This is, I think, our architect letter at the end, where he went and reviewed and kind of, reinforced what we have been wanting to do. I think Abby said I need to address, maybe not, that we did get a violation during our repair process. The letter actually came the same day we were meeting with Abby on site. So we had kind of, once we knew that there was no plywood and we needed to now kind of figure out how to move forward with a more permanent fix. We stopped what we were doing. We put in our application. I emailed Abby, called me, and we began everything right away. And then we kind of got the violation for replacing siding the next day or the next week. We weren't actually replacing the siding at the time. We were making repairs. But sometimes people don't stop to ask questions. So we obviously are upset about that and we'd like to fix it. So this is where we are. That's where we're
Okay.
at. I need to stop.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have questions? All right. Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg.
So I understand your pain and I have a few questions
Okay.
to look at. What you said, the existing siding, some of it's rotten.
Some of it is,
Are the studs inside showing signs of rot?
No.
Okay, because I'm concerned that covering over that existing rotten wood is not a good solution. That it probably needs to be removed, whatever you do. The other thing is you're not putting in any insulation.
we're not, because it's just out of our budget. Yeah, it's, $20,000 to $30,000 to insulate a house. And we're just kind of like, what do we do? Like, if we have to make a decision for how to move ahead, we've been advised that this is going to be something that can be affordable, and that if it's installed in this way, that Hardie would honor their warranties for the 30-year warranty and then the 50-year on the paint, or maybe I inverted those. But yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, that would be great if I could get a company to do some sort of restoration, right? And come in and take everything off and salvage what boards I could and sand them and, replace the ones that weren't, and then insulate the entire house and then put plywood back on the whole house and then reattach the boards and seal them and paint them. That's just not in the cards for us, right?
Okay.
But also it's a bit out of perspective for like the value of the home, right? I paid $490,000 for this house. So if it was sort of this like crazy desirable neighborhood and people were coming in and scooping up these homes, yeah, that's probably the type of work that they do. I think it's why a lot of people in my neighborhood end up just putting vinyl on stuff and not telling anyone, because they're just desperate for a fix that's affordable for them. The worry, though, I think we keep coming back to with the wood is that we don't really get any kind of warranty. When we have spoken to contractors that have given us things in writing, they give us like 6 months, 90 days. And I'm like, how could I spend $70,000 and have nothing? Like, I don't know. We want to stay here. We don't want to have to be like, okay, we're overwhelmed. It was a bad choice. But yeah, this is sort of what we've come up with that we can afford. And we feel good about it. We know it's not really ideal. But that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions? Okay, let's move to public testimony. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to speak on this application? Noting that there is no one in the room, I will turn it over to Gregory Kala to take us through any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have a couple of signups for this item. The first we'll be hearing from is Christina Conroy from the Victorian Society of New York. So Christina Conroy, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please state your name for the record and unmute your line, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. Now, while we understand the need to repair and replace deteriorated siding at 22 Marion, we do not support the proposed Hardie plank lap as an appropriate substitute for the failing historical material. Most importantly, the Hardie plank lap is the wrong style to be a faithful replacement. Most of the house features an unusual variant of German shiplap called channel rustic shiplap. This has a beveled edge between planks. The proposed Hardie plank lap siding has planks slightly overlapping, similar to more common clapboards. While this type of siding is present on some parts of the exterior of 22 Marion, it is not the predominant style of siding. If the whole exterior has to be addressed with respect to its history, we urge the owners to find a new solution that replicates the channel rustic siding rather than fully alter the appearance of the house. Additionally, the proposed trim to surround the windows is a craftsman style not in keeping with the Greek Revival and Italianate style trim at 22 Marion. The application of the new siding and window trim over historic material and new plywood, it will inappropriately alter the relationship between the plane of the siding and the windows, doors, and fascia at the top of the house. And finally, we do not believe it is a good preservation practice to cover historic material in this way, as it can both cause and hide evidence of future problems. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we'll be hearing from the Historic Districts Council. So I'm promoting you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC appreciates this applicant's need to repair and replace the siding of their beautiful home. HDC finds proposed use of hardy board inappropriate in this instance. We're concerned that the proposed assembly of adding plywood over existing siding, then house wrap, and then finally a layer of hardy board will trap additional moisture within the structure and add unneeded weight to the building's wood frame. We understand that the applicant proposes this assembly to protect their home, but we fear this approach could hasten the building's demise. We ask the Commission to require this applicant to work with staff to develop a more appropriate residing solution. We suggest stripping the existing modified German siding down to the sheathing, patching the sheathing as needed, installing an added layer of sheathing if necessary, installing a new house wrap, and then installing new modified German siding to match the original material. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I am looking at our attendees list now, and I do not see any further hands raised. So I will note for the record that Staten Island Community Board 1 recommends approval, and we also received one letter of recommendation of approval from an individual. And I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Thank you very much.
I'm so sorry. Can I just comment on one thing?
Yes.
Be super quick, I know. So we did look at this V-groove siding that Hardy makes. That does have that little indent. I don't know if it comes in all the different widths, but the thing that's become the drawback to us is the cost on it. It's in their artisanal line, which is a much higher price point than the lap siding. And because we had this big setback with the plywood, that we just don't have any money left to kind of, you know, add $5,000 or $6,000 or $8,000 to the project. Also, the idea of pulling it back to the sheathing, what is sheathing? Is that the plywood that we don't have?
Yes.
We don't have it. So if we pull it back, that's, you know, the inside of my walls. The other concern that the architect had and the contractor had was that if you would take on that kind of restoration, there's absolutely no guarantee your sheetrock in the inside isn't going to be affected, just because, you know, it's already on one side already affected with cracks forming and nails coming through the inside of the wall because, you know, they're banging it right into the studs. So anyway, sorry.
Okay. Yes, Commissioner Goldblum.
Let me be sure I understand your plan.
Mm-hmm.
Your plan is to leave what you have,
Mm-hmm.
put plywood
Well,
over,
fix what's, you know, falling apart or fix what's rotted,
Put
patch it
plywood
up so
over
it's
it.
not old board staying.
right? Put
Yeah.
plywood over the old stuff,
Mhm.
which is fixed. Then put waterproofing or, you know, the sheeting,
Mhm.
and then put the siding.
Yes.
right? And it's the same siding on all four sides. Is there a consistency to where the smaller size siding is and the bigger?
Generally on the front.
The front is
Abby, if
bigger?
you could go, no, the front has two different widths.
Show
So,
us where the.
yeah, Abby, can you go back to maybe one of the first photos? So most of the boards are 7-inch, and then when it gets above that roof, they get a little more narrow. Above the porch roof line, it gets a little bit more narrow.
Right. And on the sides, it's all the narrow stuff?
No, it's mostly the fatter stuff there,
Got it.
and then a lot of even skinnier ones that have been patched in over the years, ones running in different directions. So for the most part, it's those wider boards that you can see kind of on the corner there by the porch and by the front door.
And the cornice that you're keeping at the top,
Yeah.
the frieze, that's going to then be kind of recessed relative to what's below it.
Well, it comes out, I think, 1.5 inches. So this, we're just over 3/4 of an inch. So we'll still see, the idea is to still see that sort of little shadow that you see now, right there.
Right. So you're going to pay to repair the existing siding, then cover it with plywood, right?
Yeah, not really. So we're not going to be like taking boards off, boards that are degraded or ones I could just pull off with my hands today. They're going to be taken off and patched, correct? To make it all kind of level. Yes. So that there's a nice level base. And then also, when we realized, we have to kind of have a more permanent fix. We can't just keep doing this. We don't have plywood. Our contractor did go back to James Hardy and discuss all of this with them and show them what they were going to do. And they, said that they, would give their warranties for this type of installation.
Got it. Thank you.
So it's affordable for us. I mean, it's still expensive, but we have saved and have borrowed some of the money to get this project done. And, we do, want to honor what the house looks like. We really just want it to look like this when you look at it, better than this. I mean, everyone says you have a beautiful home. And then when they actually come in and look at it, they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, I know, it's really pretty from the sidewalk. So this is the goal. I don't really want the house to look any different. We're not putting vinyl. We don't want to do an extension. We just kind of want to safely live in our home peacefully and not have to panic all the time.
All right. I think we're going to move to our discussion now.
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Commissioner Master, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so we'll begin our discussion to this situation that is, I think, largely driven by the fact that there is no sheathing and insulation, regardless of what the exterior siding material is. So we may have some suggestions around the table that will be helpful. Commissioner Holford Smith, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I understand this situation is not an easy one. And I'm just concerned about the solution to repairing it, to put plywood over the siding and then house wrap. I'm just concerned that as testimony said, that it could potentially trap moisture. And without putting insulation, you would save on your $8,000 heating bills. You would probably get that money back over a couple of years if you put the insulation in. I would recommend that they take the siding off, put sheathing, house wrap, waterproofing, and then I think we could probably accept the hardy board in this case. I'd like to hear other people's comments on that, but I think it's going to be very complicated with all the transitions to the windows and to the roof to add those layers. I think it sounds easy, but I just think it's going to be more complicated. So, I wonder if it could even be done like facade by facade, like start with the front, do that. And I think a lot of the water, I know the water is coming through the planks, but it's also probably coming through all of the intersections with the windows and the roofs, which, you need to be addressed. But I think the better end product long-term would be to take the plywood off, take the siding off. And I don't know why that wouldn't be, just taking that, I can't imagine that would be a huge difference in cost to do that and yield better results.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum.
Hi. Okay, thanks. I have to try to separate my day job response to this from my Tuesday job response to this. My day job response to this is you're nuts for keeping the siding. Nuts. It's a total recipe for disaster. I don't care what the warranty says. you got to remove the siding. But my Tuesday job says that really is only impactful as it relates to the trim and the intersections with the existing stuff that's going to remain, in this case, at the cornice. And if the staff believes that that relationship is going to be acceptably tailored, then I can accept it. My day job says, like Ann said, I don't care what it takes. Get the kids and the relatives over and put the insulation in yourself. You will make that money back in a couple of years. Got to do it. You'll never do it if you don't do it now. But my Tuesday job says that's not our issue. I think that the siding has to, on the front facade, correspond with the historic siding as closely as possible. And that means that the V-groove product, which the applicant discussed, I think is the right product for the front facade where the artisan V-groove, where it exists. I think on the side facades, as long as the overall exposure of the clapboards is matching what's there, I think that the other facades can be the regular hardy plank, smooth, non-textured, painted material. I think that you got to look very carefully with staff at the window trims, and as long as they match the existing, and as long as they are properly flashed, like Ann said, that's 90% of most houses. That's where the leaks come through. It's got to be flashed properly. But as long as that's being done, I think that that's acceptable. These shutters should not be plastic. I'm concerned about AZEK as a building material. I guess both my Tuesday job and my regular job are concerned about it because A, it's the crappiest of materials. B, it's a fire hazard. C, it's just not appropriate on a historic house. I mean, I think that it's bad enough that we find ourselves having to use stuff like hardy plank. The use of plastic just shouldn't be on historic buildings. It's just bad. But there are alternates to it that can be used. If there is a concern about maintenance with wood, any wood products, using a penetrating opaque wood stain will last a lot longer and require a lot less maintenance than a paint would. And finally, just my day job tells me that any work that's done in New York City by a contractor must be warranted for at least 1 full year from the date of its completion by law. So anybody who's telling you otherwise is trying to do you wrong.
Thank you, Commissioner Ginsburg.
I agree with my previous commissioners and Commissioner Goldblum's recommendations. And as he said, although it isn't directly in our purview, I would not leave bad siding on there. It's asking for trouble, and it will be much better to take it off, put the plywood directly on the existing wood framing, and then put the air vapor barrier.
I'm sorry, the hearing is closed, but Abby can talk to you afterwards.
And so hopefully you could work with staff to work out the issues.
Okay. And then if the installation method issues are resolved in an appropriate way, would you be comfortable with the hardy board?
Not totally happy, but agree with Commissioner Goldblum's recommendation to use the appropriate one on the front, even though it's more expensive than the standard on the other sides.
Okay. Vice Chair Bland.
I don't think I have a lot to add. It's been a lot has been said, and a lot has been recommended in ways that we don't often recommend, but this is the case we are. So I'm certainly not against hardy board in a case like this. Anyway,
okay.
I don't think I have a.
All right, Commissioner Lutfi.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with my fellow commissioners. I do have to say, it's a very pretty home. And I could see why you love it and you want to keep it. I'm the owner of a wood frame home. And so I understand all the challenges and I understand what weather can do and how difficult it is to keep these homes up. But you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't do it correctly. And I think Anne's idea of maybe just isolating one facade at a time and doing it as you can is a way to make your improvements and preserve and increase ultimately the value that you have in this home. And that's what you really want to do. So.
All right, Commissioner Chu.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow commissioners' comments. I would say also to review your trim window doors, all those jam head sill conditions with staff, because there's no details here, but it is, as my fellow commissioners noted, all about flashing properly. And I want to reiterate the point, and you should speak to your contractors again about removing existing siding, because then you can properly level the facade, which is probably waving all over the place. So I can imagine every corner just being crazy mixing of facades. How do they meet those corners? It'll make the job cleaner and a better product. Bad insulation, throw it in there. You got the cavity. Done. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Master.
I'm so sorry about all the problems that you guys have been having. The pictures of the water inside the house are very moving. I can't even imagine how difficult it's been. I want to thank you for coming and presenting to LPC. I know it must be tough. I am also from Staten Island and I know this district well. You have a beautiful home. And I have to trust the experts here, the architects that would know more. But I think that the Hardy Board would be appropriate here. I echo what the other commissioners have said.
Okay, Commissioner Jefferson.
A very difficult situation that I can, I think my colleagues have gone through all the technical issues and I would go with that.
Okay. All right. So I think we have enough here. I'm going to do this motion, I think, to see if we can try to capture everything that was discussed in the comments. So in the matter of docket number 24-03209, 22 Marion Avenue, St. Paul's Avenue, Stapleton Heights Historic District, a Greek Revival style freestanding house with later alterations built in the mid-19th century. This is an application to install Hardy Board siding, and I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the St. Paul's Avenue, Stapleton Heights Historic District. I also note that the building was originally constructed in the mid-19th century and moved to this site circa 1886-87 when the Queen Anne style porch and other elements were added to the house. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the existing wood siding exhibits various sizes and evidence of previous repair campaigns and may not be original to the house, which was relocated and altered with Queen Anne style elements. And therefore, the installation of new siding and in some places with a different profile will be in keeping with the house's history of alterations. That the proposed painted fiber cement board will recall traditional wood siding in terms of size and finish, and that the block features a variety of modern and historic materials. And therefore, the fiber cement board cladding will not call undue attention to itself. That where possible, existing wood elements, including the cornice, will be retained, thereby preserving these historic features. That the use of composite trim will be limited to the plain wood window surrounds, and will, when painted, will blend similarly with similarly painted historic wood elements. And that the work will support the long-term preservation of the house. However, I recommend that the applicants explore removing the siding and installing insulation and installing the new hardy board above that to achieve typical profiles and relationships with historic wood trim and to achieve a more sound and safe installation, long-term installation. And if that is not feasible, they can explore the proposed method, but work very closely with the staff to achieve the proper relationships between the siding and the trim boards. And that the front facade have the artisanal brand or line of hardy board to match the historic profile, while the side facades can have the flat clapboard style, and that no AZEC be used within this composition of alternative and composite materials. And I think that that covers it. Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Master,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 10 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
Okay, so please do continue to work with the staff, and I urge you to think about doing this the proper way, which I think will save money in the long run. Okay, we're going to just try to get through one more item quickly before we break for lunch. We are well behind schedule, and we'll try to move quickly after this. But this applicant has been waiting, so we'll move through this item and then we'll break for lunch.
Right, and that is public hearing item number 2, LPC 24-00954, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of the Bronx, block 5829, lot 3601, 331 West 250th Street in the Fieldstone Historic District. This is a Dutch colonial revival style house designed by Dwight J. Baum, built in 1918 to 19. The application is to replace sunroom and fill.
This isn't working, right? Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca Levin. I'm here on behalf of the owners of this property, 331 West 250th Street in the Bronx. This is in Riverdale. It's part of the Fieldstone Historic District. So the purpose of this application is for the replacement of the eastern sunroom doors, and also to raise the floor approximately 4 inches in that location. So if you could go to the next slide. Oh, I can. Oh, okay. Oh. Next slide. I don't think it's working.
Next slide.
Okay. So unfortunately, there's no tax photo, but this one is from the 80s, and it just kind of shows that the house is relatively unchanged from what we believe was historic. Next slide. These are photographs of the existing sunroom on the eastern facade. I believe that these are all original doors in this location, and they all swing outward. Next slide. These are just some more photographs of the door and how it's constructed. Next slide. So these are photographs of the existing floor within the house, and this sunroom. There's a 4-inch step down that the owners would like to remove. They want to actually lift the floor 4 inches so that it's level and flush with the inside of the house. They want to use this as part of their home, and don't want to have to step down. And if you could see in the bottom photograph that the floor that's there now is completely deteriorated. And in the previous photos, you could see that the existing doors are all single pane and they're rotting. There's little to no insulation there. Next slide.
So this kind of shows just what the doors look like. And I think it's important to note that all of the windows and the doors on the other part of the house were already replaced. And that was also brought to a hearing. So what we're proposing here is to match the detail, which is an aluminum clad exterior with a wood interior. All of the windows in the house were already replaced with Pella. The doors are proposed to be replaced with Marvin. Next slide. This is the other side of the house. Next slide. So this is the existing floor plan. You can see that the doors swing out and there's a lot of fixed units on this. Everything that we're proposing will match what's there now as far as the floor plan. Nothing is changing. They're looking to match what's there now, just with a different exterior material and a little bit higher up off the floor. Next slide. So this kind of shows what's existing now and what's being proposed. The main difference visually is just that the floor, when you're raising the floor 4 inches, we're taking that from the bottom rail. So loss of glass is very, very minimal here. Next slide. Same here on all the doors, existing, proposed, same divided light cuts, same operation. The transoms are remaining. It's again, just the floor is being raised. So you're losing a little bit of that bottom rail. Next slide. Same here. Next slide. So this is the window schedule. We're looking to propose a white finish to match what's there now. And the loss of glass is very minimal. Next slide. And these are just the section details. So that really wraps up what we're proposing.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? All right, I don't see any questions. And there is no one in the room to testify, so I'll turn it over to Gregory Kala to see if we have any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have one attendee with their hands raised, that being Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. So Lucy Levine, I will promote you to panelist right now. And if you could please unmute your line and state your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. HDC finds that this proposed replacement infill doesn't offer the same solid to void ratio that the existing doors do, leading the glazed portion of the project to appear less refined than it could. There are other products on the market, such as Norwood slimline doors, that may offer the applicant a more satisfying and well-proportioned solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I am looking through the attendees list now, and I do not see any further hands raised. So I will note for the record that Bronx Community Board 8 recommends approval. And I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to respond to the comments we've heard? Okay, all right, Commissioners, do we have any final questions? Okay, let's move to close the hearing. Vice Chair Bland, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Commissioner Lutfi, would you second that motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so the hearing is now closed and we'll begin our discussion. I'm going to turn to Commissioner Goldblum, our resident commissioner here.
I know this house pretty well. I was actually walking by it the other day and I went up to the front window to look inside because it looks like it's abandoned. It's a mess. And I'm glad to see that they're going to be doing some work on it. It's a beautiful, remarkable, special house, a really unusual one. I think this is totally appropriate. I have no concerns about it. I'm glad they're doing some work. Huh?
They took a shot at it.
No, it looked like someone was living in the house. So I was reassured. Yeah, glad it's going to be improved. It's great.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Holford Smith.
I agree. I think it's appropriate.
All right, Commissioner Jefferson.
Totally appropriate.
Okay. Commissioner Master.
Appropriate.
Okay, Commissioner Chu.
I think it's appropriate. Just one small question, which is there's a beautiful picture of the detail of how the door assembly goes up into reveal to the soffit. Is that retained in the? Thank you. Okay.
All right, Commissioner Lutfi.
Appropriate.
Vice Chair Bland.
Pass. I think this change is appropriate.
Okay. Commissioner Ginsburg.
Appropriate.
All right. And Commissioner Chapin.
Yes, I think it's totally appropriate.
Okay. And I would just note that we have in these districts with freestanding houses where the houses are set back far from the street, approved windows in an aluminum clad material, finding that change in material won't be perceptible from the street. And I think the configuration will maintain the spirit of this enclosed porch. So we'll go ahead and approve this. Commissioner Goldblum, would you make the motion?
Sure. Regarding 331 West 250th Street in the Fieldson Historic District, the application is to replace sunroom infill. I note the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Fieldson Historic District. And I recommend approval, finding that the proposed change in materials from painted wood to aluminum clad wood with a baked enamel finish will not be discernible from the street, given the setback siting of the house and the presence of multiple heavy columns, rendering the sun porch infill mainly in shadow, that the details, configurations, and dimensions of the new sunroom enclosure with applied mutton grids and internal spacer bars will be similar to the existing enclosure, that the raising of the floor of the sunroom 4 inches will only have a minor impact on the dimensions of the framing and glazed area, that the new sunroom enclosure will be in keeping with the original and will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of the house or of the Fieldson Historic District.
Thank you. And Commissioner Holford Smith, would you second that motion?
I second it.
Okay, Mark.
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Master,
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
With 10 in favor and none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, that's approved. Thank you. All right, commissioners and public, we're going to break for lunch now. It is 1:12. Let's try to come back at 1:42 so that we can start right up at 1:45 with the public. So we'll ask all members of the public to voluntarily exit the Zoom meeting at this time if you wish to return. So that you don't have difficulties if you do return, technical difficulties. So we'll ask you to exit the meeting and we will see everybody at 1:45.